One day, when no one expected it, the state of Kairon declared the beginning of a holy war. The human monasteries from Ifan participated in that fight. They were black-eyed and had extraordinary physical abilities. There were also the witches of Temfei. They summoned beasts and skillfully used spells. That event led to complete chaos on Earth. It seemed that everything in that world had broken down. A true saint who is beyond time received the blessing of the gods. His body did not age and his beauty did not fade. Then the great priest of Kairon declared publicly that only the believers of the country had received the sacred power of the gods. And the proof of this, according to him, was fire. He called upon the breath of the gods to carry out their judgment on the pagans. The man was kneeling. The master was telling him that he highly appreciated the fact that he had put the human monsters from Ifan to fight. He asked if he knew the one people called the Divine Mace, the most powerful weapon of Kairon. He wondered why the warrior could not stand against the witches of Temfei. He ordered Merklat to answer. Unlike the human monsters, who relied only on their physical strength and madly rushed into attack, the witches, each possessing a separate type of ability, went on the run, and then hid in all corners of Temfei. The warrior said that now it was not so easy to find each of them with shelter. The gentleman asked if Merklat had heard of the Great Witch. That was the name given to the chief of them. She had the ability to control animals, and also turn good souls into true evil. The question of why she did not interest the warrior hung in the air. The knight looked up and asked whether the master himself wanted it. An order was given to find that witch with eyes as red as blood, in order to cut off her head and cut her body into pieces. Merklat also had to be careful. There were rumors that just one look from her red eyes could captivate, and therefore the master did not want to lose God's faithful servant because of some witch. The sword pierced the dirty body and was stained with scarlet blood. The crows were sitting on the branches of tall trees. The knight approached from behind and called out to Mr. Merklat. The subordinate reported that all the witches in the area had been checked, but no one with red eyes had been found. The knight assumed that the cunning creature had hidden somewhere like a nasty rat, and was keeping quiet. He was surprised that these witches had never trained but hid so well. Therefore, he assumed the assistance of the great witch's power. Merklat called to go further. The assistant asked where their next path lay. The crows on the branches cried out. The knight was going to go southwest, a cave hidden from prying eyes in a crevice of a rock. Someone inside asked if it was really possible to be here. In the depths there was a red-haired woman. She said that she had heard that all the witches in the neighboring valley had been burned alive. The brunette was deeper in the darkness. She wondered if her interlocutor believed her. Her red eyes flashed from the darkness. She confirmed. But the girl was grabbed tightly by the hand, and they dragged her away from that cave into the light. She couldn't keep up and asked to wait. The imperious lady asked how many times she had to be told not to make things up. But the redhead was afraid that Vienna would betray them and go against them. But she was sure that such a thing would never happen, because the Great Witch, in her opinion, was not like that. The knight in armor swung his sword in a skillful hand. Scarlet blood sprayed in all directions. The redhead's face was also stained with the blood of the fallen victim. She became frightened and timid, froze in place. Soon the bloody weapon was pointed at her throat. The girl was making inarticulate sounds. Her body was shaking. Clear blue eyes flashed through the visor. The knight asked coldly and menacingly where they were coming from. Tears rolled from the redhead's eyes. She ran as fast as she could to warn the others. But what the girl saw in the village brought her to complete despair. Knights were killing women in the streets. There were cries of begging for salvation. There was a sound from behind. The knight was approaching the redhead. Her face twisted and she began to laugh hysterically. But at the same time, tears were pouring from her eyes. It turned out that the Great Witch had abandoned them. The sword was already raised mercilessly over the girl's head. A scream. Merklat gave the order to check everyone's eyes, and to immediately kill those whose eyes were not red. Soon one young knight called out to the gentleman about Merklat. He was holding a young lady with red eyes by the hair. The girl did have red eyes. Long chestnut hair framed her thin face, and her pink lips were cracked and sore. Merklat looked with pity at the young, defenseless, very fragile creature. But then he suddenly remembered the gentleman's words asking him to be careful, that supposedly one look into the red eyes could carry him away. Suddenly, a blue glow appeared between them. The witch's hands were tied behind her back and she was being held by the younger knight. Merklat put the tip to the girl's throat. He looked her straight in the eyes. He said, gritting his teeth, that he had found the red-eyed witch. Snowy winter. Rave Fortress on the border of Kairon. Timfei's outskirts. A dungeon with prisoner cells. The gates are raised and the doors are wide open. A corridor. The tip of the metal was heating on the hot coals. A woman's scream was heard. A scream of pain. Night fell upon the earth. The stars covered the sky completely. It seemed as if everything was asleep. The gentleman glanced through the papers. He asked the knight if it seemed strange that the great witch had been captured so easily, and then he asked if there was anything strange about that person. The speaker said that so far they had not managed to find anything like that. He was advised not to relax and be careful. He was also interested in whether there was any news from the temple. The knight replied that a man should arrive at dawn who would take the witch to the capital. At this point, the speaker was released, but he finally decided to tell what he saw. That on the day they found the cave where the witches were hiding, the great witch was laughing, looking at her fellow tribesmen burning. The gentleman thought that it was on that day that the young lady with red eyes was captured. She wanted to tell them something, but she was tied up and taken to prison. Now it was unclear what the witch had planned. A bright light was pouring through the window. A muscular man naked to the waist was putting on a shirt. The brunette who entered called out to Mr. Mecklart. He asked in surprise what had been going on since the morning. The speaker asked for forgiveness. It seemed to him that it was worth going out. Several carts were standing at the gate. There was also a detachment of knights. The gentleman who arrived asked if they had seen this. He was holding a paper in his hands. It was a document with an official seal, namely permission from the great priest himself. They asked not to worry, assuring that there should be no problems. The gentleman also came out into the yard after the servants and asked what all the fuss was about. The guest had a strange appearance. There was a mask on his face. He bowed moderately, greeting the inquisitor. He introduced himself by the name of Pepin Toth. He handed over the document. After reading it, it became clear that there was an order to take the great witch to the capital and execute her. The same document placed all responsibility for the transportation on Dr. Pepin Toth. The dogs howled and barked, spraying saliva. The knight led the witch out of the dungeon. Her hands were shackled. The young creature looked fragile and frightened. Her red eyes were sad. The inquisitor looked over his shoulder. He angrily asked who dared to remove the bandage from the witch's head. The knight replied that a man named Pepin had expressed a desire to look at her red eyes. The visitor was surprised that it was the great witch. Such a dirty and low creature. The girl was doing something with her hands. A hissing sound came from her mouth. Suddenly a bright red glow appeared. All the dogs broke loose from their leashes. One of them knocked down the knight holding the witch. He dropped the chain. The girl took advantage of the moment and began to run away. A cry was heard calling for her to be caught. The inquisitor was about to grab his sword. He considered her attempt to escape stupid, but Mr. Pepin stopped him. He asked him not to harm the witch. The girl ran closer to them instead of trying to hide. At some point, the knight, who had recovered, grabbed her by the shoulder. The young lady said that she could help them destroy the Vedam. The Lord Inquisitor was surprised by her words. A rude question was asked about what nonsense she was talking. The prisoner asked Mr. Mecklart for forgiveness, but she was roughly grabbed by the shoulder. The knight, rattling his heavy chain, ordered her to follow him. The gentleman asked her to wait. He quoted her words, and asked why he should believe her. Everyone nearby was surprised. The guest from the capital, too. The red-eyed girl turned around. She shouted over her shoulder, "Le Gavin!" The knight continued to push the prisoner away. The girl could be sent there to check people. The inquisitor asked his assistant how far it was from here to the place indicated by the witch. She answered that one day would be enough for the round trip. An order was given to send reconnaissance there. The knight accepted the order without question. The gentleman gave the paper to the guest. He ordered the people to be lined up and the witch to be locked up. The prisoner's transfer was postponed until an investigation was carried out. Pepin was indignant. The young lady being led back to the dungeon by the knight looked back. She looked pitifully with her blood-red eyes. Her skin was covered with scars. Shortly after, Mecklart sat at the head of the table. Two men in red robes arrived to discuss pressing issues. It was surprising that the gentleman could actually believe that devil. It seemed that the witch just wanted to save her own skin. He asked the gentleman not to fall for such tricks. The second supported the rightness of the priest Brown. It was believed that even if the witch knew a lot, she could not be left alive. Otherwise, something unpredictable could happen. The knight leaned over Mr. Mecklart and reminded him that the information about the shelter turned out to be true. They asked about evidence. The priest admitted that some could already be under the influence of that daring witch. The bag was placed on the floor. Something round was taken out of it and placed on the table. And then the question was asked whether that was enough. The priest's face distorted. The gentleman, squinting his eyes, said that it took 3 years to completely exterminate the human monsters of Ifon. He was convinced that the longer the war lasted, the more losses the army and the state suffered. Meklart said that he would change his mind if someone suggested some effective way to end the war as soon as possible. He said that if this was not to the liking of the priests, then they could personally go to the front and take part in the battles. Father Brown screamed. He was indignant that it was unacceptable to leave the witch alive because of this. Meklart agreed that he was right. Therefore, he asked the doctor to tell the great priest that he needed time to determine what benefit could this witch bring them. The priests were indignant and against it. Mr. Pepin replied that in that case something was needed that could convince. The Inquisitor said 6 months. He was going to burn half of Temfe to the ground. He asked if that was enough. The corridor of the dungeon. Massive iron chains raised iron bars at the entrance. The girl was sitting on the floor of the cell. Her eyes were blindfolded and her skinny hands were shackled. A tiny mouse approached a pair of thin female hands. Squeaking thinly, the animal was not at all afraid of the human's proximity. The cell doors creaked. A shadow fell on the floor and walls. They ordered the girl to come out. The guard's hand in a leather glove roughly grabbed the prisoner by the forearm and abruptly lifted her fragile body. The girl involuntarily gasped in pain. The knight dragged the witch along the corridor. He asked the elder where to take her. The girl didn't know who was in front of her. Her eyes were covered with a thick bandage. A foot in a heavy leather boot took a step towards her. It was Meklart himself. He declared that he would personally take the prisoner. The gentleman sat on the edge of the table. In front of him stood a captive girl in chains. He asked if she knew why she was here. He said that in Stein there was only half of the amount that the girl had told them when indicating the place. Meklart assumed that the prisoner was simply tired of informing on witches. Or he assumed that she was trying to help her own, albeit belatedly. The girl replied that if she had wanted to help those witches, she would not have reported them at all. The Inquisitor narrowed his eyes. He saw that the girl had clenched her fists, and he asked her to take 5 steps forward. The prisoner obeyed meekly. Rattling her chains, she approached the Inquisitor. Meklart tore the blindfold from her eyes with a sharp movement. Leaning over her, he menacingly asked where the other shelter was. The young lady looked at the gentleman with surprise and fear. Her huge eyes, which took up half her face and were unusually red. In 6 months, half of the witches of Temfe were burned. The map on the wall had marks of the places where the witches were caught. The girl wondered how long it would take to exterminate the rest of them. The prisoner walked up to the map and pointed to a spot on it. According to her, it was the next shelter. "Vienna!" the Inquisitor said. The girl turned around at the name. There was fear in her eyes. From the reaction, the gentleman assumed that this was her witch name. He said that witches screamed this name, calling upon her many times, dying in the blue tribe of the Inquisition. The girl thought to herself that for the last 6 months Meklart had only received information from her about the witch's whereabouts, but he had never looked her in the eye. The witch asked herself why the Inquisitor was trying to find out her name right now. She stood under the wall with a map. She said that her name was unnecessary information for the gentleman. Meklart placed his hand on a section of the map and asked if the next place was Glada Gorge. She replied that there was a shelter not far from the cliff. The girl believed that those who had taken refuge in Stein had probably gone that way. The Inquisitor said that the witches' habits should change in 6 months, and they, having a head on their shoulders, will not move along the old routes. But Vienna considered them stupid creatures, subordinate to the devil. Meklart asked what if they didn't find anyone again, like in Stein. He informed her that then her denunciations would no longer make sense. The heavy chain clanked. The words of denial resounded loudly. The girl insisted that they definitely should be there. Vienna took a step but got tangled in the chain. She screamed and began to fall on the Inquisitor. He pushed the witch away from him. He asked in a cold tone how she could be so confident in her information. Meklart looked at the frail prisoner, and he supposed that she might have some way of getting news, even while in the dungeon. The Inquisitor also suggested the possibility that it would never be possible to exterminate all the witches, no matter how much they were hunted, as long as the main one of them was alive. The girl bit her lip. She assured me that if I did as I was told, they would be able to destroy an entire tribe of witches. The prisoner assumed that one day the moment would come when the blue fire would burn her to ashes. She stated that, however, she did not want to die now. The Inquisitor promised that her wish would definitely come true. Turning his head to the side, he ordered her to come in. The master ordered the intern to take the witch to the room. He obeyed the order without question. The prisoner being led away looked over her shoulder and called for the inquisitor. She was surprised that Meklard ordered her to be taken to a room, not a cell. She struggled and asked the guard where she was being taken. But then she saw the door. The witch peered through the crack with her red eye. There, a pale brunette was removing a protective mask from his face. Mr. Pepin declared that he was waiting for the Great Witch. Opening the door, the guard roughly pushed the witch forward. She looked around with wide eyes until her gaze met a familiar face. The girl's eyebrows rose in surprise and her gaze became tense. She could not understand what this man was doing in this place. Fiona looked towards the exit, but the door was already locked. Dr. Pepin chuckled behind his hand. He called his subordinate's reaction strange. As he approached the leather briefcase, he noted that he had been responsible for the witch's treatment for 6 months. It seemed to him that during this time they had become a little closer. Surgical instruments lay on the fabric at the side of the suitcase. Looking at them, the girl again thought with disgust that the treatment was just a pretext. In a quiet voice, Fiona asked why the doctor had not come to the prison cell as usual. He smiled slightly. Looking at the witch's bloody robe, the man replied that, according to the inquisitor, her leg was injured. He suggested starting with treatment. The girl's face expressed frustration and slight fear. Her plump lips were pouting as if she was trying to hide her displeasure. The prisoner walked slowly towards Dr. Pepin. With her shackled hands, she lifted her robe to show the wound on her leg. The man sat down, carefully examining the injury. The girl, avoiding his gaze, turned her head away and noticed a large container of bathing water. The doctor rubbed his chin thoughtfully and said that it was much more serious than expected. Blood and pus hid the wound itself. Smiling like a lunatic, the man said that they would have to wash the area. After his words, Vienna suddenly plopped down into a wide container of warm water. The witch coughed as she awkwardly tried to stand up. Her clothes and long hair were soaking wet. Suddenly, Dr. Pepin grabbed the witch's leg roughly and pulled her towards him. He confidently assured her that he would heal the wound as always. With a sly grin, the man said that the pain the head witch deemed necessary for healing. Then he pressed his thumb hard against the wound. Vienna's scarlet eyes filled with pain, and she couldn't bear it any longer and screamed. It seemed as if every corner of her body was filled with unbearable suffering. Ignoring the prisoner's pain, the doctor said that the guards in the dungeon were often changed. Everyone was afraid that she might use her charms on them. The girl struggled to free herself. The man mercilessly added that she was entirely to blame for beating the guards. Dr. Pepin continued to hold the witch's wounded leg tightly, preventing her from moving. Although she was shackled, she still continued to try to break free. Suddenly, he pressed hard on the open wound again. Vienna screamed in pain, jerked and accidentally touched the sacred cross hanging around his neck. The man froze, stunned, his gaze full of amazement. The witch lying in the water looked at him with a face full of despair, begging for mercy. Dr. Pepin looked the captive up and down and laughed mockingly. Pain and despair immediately froze in her eyes, filling them with tears. The man stared at Vienna like a madman. He said that she had managed to charm him with her red eyes after all. The head witch remembered the moment of the conversation with the inquisitor. He said that Stein had only half of the number she had named. The girl assumed that she deserved this treatment because she had not reported enough witches. Suddenly, an even more frightening thought occurred to her. Vienna thought they were getting rid of her, considering her useless. But suddenly the doctor pounced on her, breathing heavily. Fighting for her life, the witch knocked his hand away and tried to grab at least some kind of surgical scalpel. Before she could grab the scalpel, someone kicked the man. Pepin fell, looking at the inquisitor in bewilderment, his gaze stern. Trying to justify himself, the doctor stuttered and asked when the man had managed to enter the room. The man only sharply and sternly ordered him to get out. The surprised brunette froze with his mouth slightly open. He couldn't believe that he had heard such words addressed to him. Unable to tolerate the doctor's slowness, the inquisitor growled again. With an even more threatening voice, he ordered the immediate exit of the room. The man said that henceforth the treatment of the Great Witch would be carried out in the morning at 11 o'clock. He added that he would be present at everything. Hope appeared in Vienne's eyes, but Pepin continued to pester the blonde. He angrily asked why he had to repeat the same thing 3 times. Realizing that the inquisitor was at his limit, the doctor quickly stood up. Putting down his instruments, he headed for the exit. Pepin took hold of the door handle, but before he left, he turned around once more. His voice was quieter, and after a slight hesitation, he apologized guiltily. Lost in thought, the girl felt horror. She did not know whether the Inquisitor had seen her attempt to grab the scalpel, or whether everything had gone unnoticed. The witch pressed her lips together nervously, scolding herself for her haste. At the same time, she knew that she just wanted to get out of this situation as quickly as possible. The man looked at the captive seriously and asked a question. He asked if she had bewitched Dr. Pepin with just one look. With despair in her voice, the girl began to deny everything. She tried to prove that she did not have and never had such power. The Inquisitor thought for a moment and came to a conclusion. He skeptically assumed that Dr. Pepin had attacked her for no apparent reason. Fiona looked down, considering the situation. She came to the conclusion that the healer's behavior was explained by the fact that she was a helpless woman. The Inquisitor frowned thoughtfully and looked down at the floor. Then he asked if the witch was sure she had not used her spells. The man couldn't understand her. Vienna, bracing her hands on the side of the tank, rose to her feet. Water was running in streams from her prison uniform and long hair. The head witch raised her head and looked at him with a challenge. In a light tone, she suggested that he check everything himself. The girl assured him that if there was some kind of sinister force in her eyes, he would certainly feel it. The Inquisitor angrily asked if the witch had really decided to bewitch him too. She thought that she had been reporting him for 6 months, but he still did not believe her. Vienna expressed fear that if her doubts continued to grow, the Inquisitor would stop listening to her and order her to be burned at the stake. She asked if the gentleman had ever fallen under her spell in the last 6 months, looking into his eyes. She also assumed that they were afraid of her attack. The Inquisitor asked again. He said that even a deity would reject her damned body. But it turned out that Pepin knew that he would come here soon. And if the witch's escort from the capital behaved like that with her, then there was a good reason for it. Meklart grabbed the girl by the hand. She screamed as she was lifted above the water. And a second later, the Inquisitor held her in his arms. He said that, wanting to know the reason he would keep her close. Having seated the prisoner, the master gave her a cloth to wipe her wet body. He said that now she would sleep here, that while he worked during the day, Vienna should be with him. He asked if any further explanations were necessary. The girl wondered why the gentleman was suddenly behaving like that. He answered what he had just said. The Inquisitor stated that he wanted to personally check whether the prisoner was really hiding a sinister power or not. They had seen each other no more than a dozen times in the last 6 months, and he hoped to understand this if she was nearby. He wondered if Vian had heard anything from Dr. Pepin, that the high priest would soon be arriving here to examine the captive. A few days later, the chains rattled. The guard led the Great Witch behind him. Having brought the girl to the door, the bandage was removed from her. She found herself in front of Meklart. The Inquisitor sat at the table. In his hands was a piece of paper covered with writing. He was deep in thought. The great priest himself intended to arrive soon, and he notified them in writing, sealing the paper with his seal. The news of the visit spread with incredible speed. Dr. Pepin's suggestion was accepted. Wash, cure, and tidy up the witch's appearance. The Inquisitor slapped his palm on the table. He ordered the girl to stand up straight. He wondered if she was the only witch with red eyes. The girl answered in the affirmative. Meklart asked if she could prove it. She answered in the negative. The gentleman said she was of no use. He asked if Vienna was really a witch. She confirmed it. The Inquisitor was surprised that the Great Witch had no power. The girl asked if his interrogation was over. Meklart wondered if she really had done nothing to bring the Great Priest here. Vienna recalled that she had spent the last 6 months chained in a dungeon. The Inquisitor believed that the witch could have bewitched the doctor and carried out her deeds. The girl insisted that she did not have such powers. The gentleman stood up. Coming closer, he took the shackles and lifted the captive. The Inquisitor pressed her hands against the wall. He asked what it was in that case. The man leaned over the witch, holding her shackled hands, looking at Vienna in amazement. The hero stammered that the scars were traces of animal bites. This was very unusual. Indeed, the horrible marks that crossed the thin white arms were not fresh. They had clearly appeared before Kieran's purification. The girl froze, staring at the man in shock. Fear was frozen in her huge, wide-open eyes. Vienna immediately hurried to look away. But the man kept asking where such terrible marks on the body of the Great Witch came from. Suddenly, he grabbed the frightened beauty by the neck and lifted her off the floor. The girl screamed sharply from pain and horror, and he brought his face close to her ear and began to speak quietly. The man told her that he had found very interesting notes in Stein. The papers stated that each season the witches dedicated more and more girls, but it was unclear what the new sacrifices were for. Despite the tightness in her throat, the witch knew the man was waiting for an answer. She quietly squeezed out that there was no reason, but he still wouldn't calm down. It was known that witches could control animals, and the hero assumed that the girls were sacrificed for this reason. And if that wasn't the reason, then it was worth finding out where those scars came from. The gentleman's blue eyes flashed coldly and narrowed with anger. Then Vienna spoke out of breath. She said that Tymphea had many forests and wild animals. That was where the scars came from. However, this answer did not satisfy the man. He leaned towards the witch, burning her with his gaze. The hero hissed angrily through his teeth that he would have to conduct an experiment. The girl groaned in fear. Vienna stammered that it was not like that at all, and if she could control animals, she would not obey him. Large tears rolled from the beautiful eyes of the beauty. Now she looked especially helpless and unhappy, and the man looked at her and thought. He saw that the girl's pupils and lips were a rare shade of red. This spoke of the aura of a great witch. After some hesitation, the gentleman slightly loosened his fingers, squeezing the girl's throat. Finally, she was able to breathe normally, and suddenly the man let go of her hand completely. Having lost her support, the beautiful witch collapsed to the floor without strength, and the gentleman turned to the stairs and called the butler. His loud cry cut through the sudden silence of the hall. The tall double door opened immediately. Behind it stood an elderly man, bowing respectfully. Then the master dryly ordered him to bring water for washing. He humbly hastened to carry out the order. The butler only cast an interested glance at the girl at the end. Backing away, he began to leave. Suddenly, someone pushed the elderly man aside. An authoritative voice demanded that he clear the way. A strong hand pushed aside the protesting butler. The unexpected guest jerked the handle and swung the door open. The beautiful witch, frozen in fear, and the imperious gentleman looked at the man who entered. It was Father Brown, and now he indignantly asked why the man kept a witch near him. The man's voice broke with anger. The gentleman grimaced with displeasure. Such an unceremonious intrusion could only be expected from a clergyman. However, the man explained that he simply wanted to understand what harm a witch could do. At this, the guest huffed indignantly, pointing at the girl with a finger trembling with rage. Brown said that she could not be kept in the office. A witch's place was in the dungeon. The guest even rushed to the master and began to prove that it was absolutely forbidden to remove the shackles. But the master only asked him to step aside. This shocked the priest. No one had ever used such a tone towards him before. He even asked again. The gentleman calmly replied that his servant had brought water. That is why he asked the guest to step aside. Having said this, the man headed towards the table, and Father Brown began to shout that this would not do. He explained that the witch should be handed over to the priests. After all, the man simply did not realize how dangerous she was. Then the master asked if the high priest simply wanted to examine the witch. After all, priests had no right to torture anyone, although it was quite possible that the priests were capable of something even worse. Saying this, the man rolled up his sleeves and began to wash his hands in a basin of water. Priest Brown began to object hotly. He said that priests are servants of God, and they can drive out demons with their prayers. Then the gentleman grinned and asked since when the priests had such abilities. After all, before they used boiling water or nails. Hearing these terrible words, the girl decided to raise her voice. Vienna tried to timidly address Inquisitor Maclart, and suddenly she saw a bright flash before her eyes. Her pupils narrowed to the size of a pinhead. The beautiful witch groaned and sank back down to the floor. She didn't understand why this was happening again at that moment. Everything blurred before her eyes. The voices of the master and the Inquisitor began to be heard from afar, as if through cotton wool. In despair, Vienna dropped her head onto her cuffed hands. She couldn't let this happen now. Meanwhile, the blonde gentleman coldly said that the priests, as always, should be busy with prayers, and not appeal to divine power. Seeing that the priest froze in indignation, the man did not deny himself the pleasure of pricking him, and advised him to pray more diligently. Brown couldn't stand it any longer. He turned red with anger and shouted, asking what the owner meant by this. The host's silence inflamed him even more. The guest clenched his fists, burning with anger. A moment later, he pushed the table with a sharp movement. Brown screamed that there was a limit to everything, and the master should not boast of sacred power. The bowl standing on the table flew to the floor from the strong impact. Water splashed around. The owner looked at all this in amazement, and then his cold blue eyes widened in surprise. The man noticed that most of the water had landed on the beautiful witch, and now Vienna was soaking wet. Inquisitor Maclart and the priest looked at the girl. The guest even opened his mouth in surprise, and Vienna lifted her wet face and looked at the master. A muffled moan escaped her lips. Suddenly the girl closed her eyes. Tears mixed with water rolled down her cheeks. She understood that everything was starting again. A moment later, she was already falling unconscious on her side. Seeing this, the gentleman rushed towards her. He ran up to the fallen girl and knelt down next to her. Holding out his hand, the man called out to Vienna, and she suddenly opened her eyes. And now they were bright red. Now the girl looked more like a strange animal than a human. With difficulty coming to her senses, the girl thought that her life was terrible. And then she suddenly saw an unusual mouse with scarlet eyes. She was gnawing on a delicious red apple. Vienna felt a terrible hunger, took the apple and brought it to her lips. Taking a bite, she bitterly recalled the life of her mother and her mother. Both of them were unhappy, and now the beautiful witch was repeating their fate. With difficulty, the girl sat up and looked around. Vienna saw that she was in a semi-dark cave. She rose to her feet and peered into the darkness. The mouse, who had been eating the apple, also jumped up. The little animal rushed towards the dark hole in the wall. The girl thought that the mouse was heading towards the underground passage and decided to watch the rodent. Suddenly, the little animal raised its head and became alert. Vienna listened. Someone's voice asked if the witch had woken up. Two people were walking down the stone steps. One of them was Inquisitor Maclar. The other was dressed in black, wearing a mask and holding a satchel. The man was a doctor, and now he was telling the Inquisitor that the beauty's body had fully recovered, but a full examination was needed. Vienna was dumbfounded by horror when she heard their conversation. She tried to order herself to wake up. After all this could not be happening in reality. And the mouse, as if sensing danger, suddenly became worried. The little animal spun around on the spot and rushed towards the dark abyss. The girl rushed after her, but she only managed to see a thin, long tail that disappeared into the darkness of the underground passage. Then the beautiful witch realized that her only salvation was to run away. Vienna ran to the hole after the mouse. At some point, a boulder blocked her path, but there was some free space above it. Then the girl began to climb up. Sharp stones painfully scratched her bare feet and beads of sweat ran down her face. And suddenly one of the stones moved under her fingers. The girl lost her balance and realized that she was falling backwards into the terrible dungeon. Along with her, the body of a small mouse rolled down from the boulder. Drops of blood were red on the indifferent gray stones. Suddenly, Vienna came to her senses with a sharp cry. Sitting up in bed, the girl had difficulty catching her breath. She covered herself with her hands and breathed heavily through her moans. The mysterious masked doctor and the Inquisitor looked at her silently. Finally, Inquisitor Maclard asked the girl how she was feeling. However, it was already obvious that she was very ill. The doctor was already moving towards the bed on which the beautiful witch was sitting. But the owner stopped him, putting his hand on his shoulder. And Vienna was shaking with sobs, sitting on the bed with her hands over her face, the bed shaking under her. Here the Inquisitor noticed something and quickly approached. He picked up the blanket that covered the girl and began to examine it. Because of his back, the doctor could not see what had aroused such interest in the gentleman. He turned questioningly to the Inquisitor. He replied that there were bloodstains on the blanket that the witch was clutching. The men were puzzled. The doctor firmly stated that this could not be. After all, he had healed all the wounds of the beautiful witch. Then Inquisitor Maclart took Vienna's hand and turned it palm up. There were deep bleeding wounds on her thin fingers. The girl moaned as the man's fingers touched her skin. Every movement brought her unbearable pain. The witch tried to pull her hand away, but the owner looked at it carefully. He noticed that among the fresh wounds, old scars were also visible. Finally, the gentleman released Vienna's hand and walked away. After a moment of silence, he told the doctor that the examination was over and asked him to leave. Mr. Pepin shook his head indignantly. He even tried to object to the Inquisitor. However, he did not answer anything. He only slightly turned his head and sent the doctor a sideways glance with his icy blue eyes. He immediately became embarrassed and backed away. Stuttering, the doctor began to apologize and retreat to the door. When the doctor left, the owner came to the bed again and addressed Vienne. He noticed that the wounds looked like someone had bitten them. Then the girl tried to explain that she had been bitten by mice in the dungeon. And now she had simply opened up unhealed wounds. This answer did not satisfy the Inquisitor. The man noted skeptically that old wounds would not bleed so much. Vienna froze in fear. Ever since she had come to this place, she had managed to hide her scars and wounds. And Inquisitor Meklart continued to look at her with his icy eyes. He said that every season the witches sacrificed a girl, and now the man suggested that this was not a simple sacrifice. In fact, the blood of the victim was given to wild animals to drink. He realized that the blood was needed to control the animals, which meant that Vienna was the girl who was sacrificed. Hearing this, the girl turned pale. Trying to object, she screamed desperately. The beauty was filled with such despair that even the lantern at her head suddenly cracked. Glass fell down. Smoke poured out. She wanted nothing more than to disappear. But the Inquisitor still held her hand and looked at her expectantly. His eyes seemed to penetrate Vienna's soul. The man advised her to tell the whole truth. Then the girl quietly said that in fact animals are not controlled. It is just some kind of interaction. The gentleman slightly loosened the hand with which he was squeezing her fingers and asked her to continue speaking. The room was almost dark. Only the firelight from the fireplace illuminated their faces. Shadows thickened in the corners. Vienna explained that she simply felt the same as the animals that tasted her blood. However, this was of no use, since it all happened in a dream. Then Inquisitor Meklart noted that she had too many useless bites, and Vienna replied that they were simply unsuccessful attempts. After thinking, the man said that he understood everything, and her denunciations were based precisely on this ability to interact with animals. But the girl hotly denied this. The very idea of denunciations was offensive to her. However, the Inquisitor smiled skeptically. It was hard to believe that the witch could see through the eyes of animals, but did not take advantage of it. His gaze froze for a moment. The man was thinking intensely about something. Finally, he said thoughtfully that there was no one in the Glada Gorge. The girl's eyes widened in amazement. Vienna screamed loudly that this simply couldn't be happening, and the man mockingly replied that she spoke so confidently, as if she had seen it all with her own eyes. After a pause, he asked her to name the next region. This was how the girl could prove that she had not used witchcraft. Looking menacingly at the beautiful witch, the Inquisitor threatened her. A lie could be a death sentence for Vienna. In that case, all her reports would have to end, and end with her own terrible death at the stake. And then the girl felt like a baby again for a moment. Her own mother was leaning over her and strangling her with all her might. She could have died. Of course, her life was not wonderful, but it was not worth ending it with such an early death either. The girl lay on her back in a damp, dark cave, her own mother continuing to strangle her. Maddened, she wished the child death. Tears stood in the eyes of both the woman and her daughter. Two pairs of red eyes looked at each other. Two strong women tried to pull the madwoman away from her defenseless victim. The third one was in a hurry to take the little girl away from the cave. Holding Vienna's hand tightly, she urged her to leave as quickly as possible. The witch screamed after the girl that she had to die. Already at the entrance, the little girl looked back. There was sadness in her eyes. Vienna sat on the forest grass. In front of her stood the same woman who had led her out of the cave. She ordered her not to enter without permission. The question was asked if the girl understood. Covering her ears, Vienna realized that the day would come when she too would be locked inside. And then she will serve the witch tribe for the rest of her life, covered in dirt and smelling of blood. Now Vienna thought that despite her lousy life, at least she could meet death as she wished. The voice of the Inquisitor brought her back to reality. He demanded that the witch name the next place where her relatives were hiding. Tyron Hill! The young lady blurted out, almost shouting. She bowed her head, looking down. The Inquisitor stood before the prisoner, listening attentively to her. She reported that a family of witches, worshippers of the devil, lived in that place, and I wondered if they were alive. But then I began to reassure myself that in any case someone had to be hiding there. Meklart called loudly to the guard outside to tell the corporal to immediately get rid of all the mice that lived in the underground passage. Vienna looked at the Inquisitor with a pitiful look. He ordered it to be carried out, adding that not a single rodent should be left alive here. A carriage with golden decorations drove past a sunny lawn. Judging by its ornate decoration, they were carrying someone important and significant. The guy in the red cloak sat with a map in his hands. He said that in 10 days they would arrive at the border, where the Rave Fortress was located. He asked the great priest what was troubling him. The white-haired youth's face was hidden by a veil. Suddenly, for no apparent reason, the horse pulling the carriage reared up. Its loud neigh literally deafened the passengers. The priest became worried. His companion asked for forgiveness. He was going to go and check everything himself. Opening the doors, he looked out cautiously. A group of peasants stood with their heads bowed. They begged the high priest to turn the Lord's favor upon them. It seemed that these were the believers of the city that was supposed to be next on their way. And although the priest's arrival was kept secret, they somehow found out about it. The Great One said that nothing could be done. He assumed that this event could be a message from God, and he intended to come out to the people. The escort replied that the time spent here would delay their arrival in Raven by a whole week longer. The priest folded his thin-fingered hands in prayer. He said that he could not reject those who needed God. The assistant stuttered and apologized for thinking too narrowly, and he was going to go out to the crowd first to restore order. The priest followed him, and our heroine sat on the bed with her face buried in her knees. Her legs were shackled. A week ago, Maclart went on a witch hunt, but not to the hill of Tyren, but to the gorge of Glada. The Inquisitor declared that there was no one there. He insisted that if the witch's denunciations were not based on witchcraft, then he demanded that the next region be named to him. Now she realized that Maclart had tricked her. No one had been sent into that gorge in the first place. The hinges creaked. The door opened. The witch was welcomed. Dr. Pepin asked her if she had been happy living alone for a week. The girl perked up. The brunette was dreamily humming something to himself. He was taking leisurely steps towards the captive. She loudly called out to the Inquisitor. Viana informed the doctor that before the military campaign, no one was allowed to enter this room by order of Mr. Maclart. Mr. Pepin asked the witch not to worry about this. After all, today, behind him stood a gentleman of a higher position. The key flashed in the doctor's hands. Demonstrating it, he assured that the witch should be happy about it. Soon the shackles fell off the girl's leg. Pepin assured the prisoner that they were going for a walk. Vienna and the doctor walked for a long time across the open area. The girl wearily asked how much longer they had to go. Pepin looked slyly at the young witch. He ordered her not to be capricious, because the goal of the walk was already close. Soon the earth began to fall from under their feet. The girl was scared. They were standing on the edge of a pit. At the bottom lay a mountain of human bodies. The already thin face of the red-eyed witch grew longer. She asked herself why she was standing next to a cesspool of corpses. Vienna glanced at the doctor with apprehension. There was a wooden container next to the man. The girl was at a loss as to what to do. Pepin spoke so that she would not even think about escaping. He drew the witch's attention to the fact that there was open ground here, where she would be visible from everywhere. A deep, malicious laugh rang out. But the girl hadn't thought about anything like that. She was asking for an answer. Were all these bodies really witches? Vienna reminded them of the agreement that all witches, except her, would be immediately executed on the spot where they were found. The doctor silently took the container and poured liquid from it over the fragile girl's head. And then he dropped it. He said it slipped. The witch asked what they poured on her. Drops ran down her face, dripping from her beard and strands of hair. Pepin said that he had finally been granted permission to check. A beastly roar was heard in the bushes. The witch looked around warily at the sound. The doctor insisted that those sounds were nothing, since hungry predators often roamed the area. He reported that if medicinal water spilled on it attracted even a little bit with its smell, it would be quite easy to lure animals. The man asked the prisoner not to worry too much. After all, special preparations had been made just in case, and archers had been stationed around the perimeter. The doctor said that some blood would have to be spilled anyway. He believed that the predators might not have reacted to the cold blood. Pepin grinned evilly and asked how it was about the freshly spilled. Tears flowed like a stream down the girl's cheeks. Vienna suddenly compared Pepin's words with her conversation with the Inquisitor. Horror and despair were reflected in her eyes. But the hungry predators, baring their teeth and spraying saliva, inexorably approached the fragile girl. The witch attempted to escape, dragging a heavy chain behind her. The doctor shouted after her that the predators would catch her anyway, and it was not worth angering them. Pepin laughed, watching the picture, but he assured the girl that if she could endure it now, she would be very grateful to him in the future. Vienna ran as fast as she could. She knew that no beast in this world could harm her. They could only desire her, and having tasted her blood, they suppressed their aggression. But even knowing this, the girl tried to run away. And what truly frightened her was the cruel fate of the Great Witch. Vienna began to whine like a little girl. The fate of the Great Witch was repeated even in this place. The girl wondered if Maclart was going to use this power once it was confirmed. She couldn't tell about Pepin, but he would kill her the very moment the results of the experiment were confirmed. The girl assumed that she would then probably be burned at the stake. Her bare foot tripped over a small stone. With her hands in shackles, Vienna was unable to keep her balance. She fell to the ground. The predator was inexorably approaching her. The wolf grabbed the witch by the arm, clamping his jaws on her just above the wrist. Blood spurted. The moment the animal tasted Vienna's blood, its eyes instantly turned red. The second wolf was also in a hurry to feast, to taste the living flesh of a weak victim already caught by his fellow. The girl whined from the realization of the inevitable. The predator made a final lunge. Its amber eyes were focused on its prey. Its mouth opened, revealing 2 rows of sharp teeth. Tears gushed from the witch's eyes. She thought that in the end even death would be lousy. But then suddenly the wolf running towards the witch let out a long howl. Blue flames enveloped his body. The red-eyed predator, having tasted blood, released its prey. It pressed itself to the ground and trembled with fear. A guttural roar was heard. Vienna glanced over her shoulder. A horse came into her sight. The Inquisitor sat on it, clutching the reins tightly. Dr. Pepin was taken aback by the surprise. He stammered and asked how Mr. McClard ended up here. The Inquisitor dismounted and replied that he should ask the respected doctor. He recalled that before leaving he had given the order to lock up the Great Witch, and now he was upset by what he had seen. Meanwhile, the wolf, struck by blue flame, writhed on the ground, breathing its last breath. The Inquisitor stared menacingly at Mr. Pepin, expecting him to answer for what he had done. The witch sat on the ground, not believing her eyes. The doctor smiled a crooked smile. Stuttering, he began to justify himself by saying that he was following the orders of the great priest. He asked to wait a second and began to rummage in his pockets. And having fished out a bundle from the depths, he handed it to the Inquisitor. This was the order of the high priest. The witch concluded that Maclart knew nothing about it at all. Pepin commented that the document stated that the high priest would arrive for a visit later than expected, and ordered that the witch's powers be tested in advance. Maclart looked down and thought that action had been taken faster than he had expected. Strong hands tore the high priest's letter in half with one jerk, tearing it. Pepin asked in fear what the Inquisitor had allowed himself to do. Blue eyes pierced the doctor coldly. Maclart asked angrily if the doctor had really staged this whole show based on just a piece of paper. The Lord Inquisitor reminded that Rave was his fortress, as was the Inquisition, which was subordinate only to him. Maclart stated that he personally did not care, and was not at all interested in who worshipped whom. However, he was not going to let his orders be disobeyed in his fortress. Dr. Pepin timidly asked for forgiveness, and promised to be more careful in the future. Maclart declared that this time he would pardon the impudent fellow at the expense of the torn letter. Having lost interest in the doctor, the gentleman turned his attention to the witch. He took her hands and helped her rise from the ground. He said that her legs were fine. He asked why she was sitting on the ground then. Vienna tried to stutter something. Turning his horse, Maclart gave the order to return to the fortress, and soon the trio left the scene as a group. But a predator lurked nearby in the bushes, having tasted the blood of the Great Witch. He remained unnoticed. His red eyes betrayed his connection with an unusual victim. Vienna's eyes were blindfolded again. The Inquisitor led her into the castle, holding her by the chain. He urged her to move faster. The girl screamed in pain. Blood came through the bandages. The bite wound was bleeding. She saw fire through the blindfold, and showing curiosity, she removed the blindfold with her hand in order to understand where she was. In the room with expensive furnishings, firewood was burning. A pleasant warmth was spreading throughout the room. Documents were scattered on the floor. The witch's bare foot stepped onto the soft carpet. The girl wondered where she was. Vianne squatted down and began to feel the carpet with her hands. The sensations delighted her. Maclart watched the antics. He wondered if the witch was so brave or just stupid. The girl raised her head and met the Inquisitor's gaze. She asked for forgiveness, confused and timid for not noticing the gentleman. The man asked her to forget, and he called Vienna closer. He himself settled down comfortably, sprawled on the sofa. He picked up the sheets and began to read them. The young witch stood obediently by while the Master Inquisitor read the document. When he finished, Maclart asked if the girl had been treated properly. The witch gasped and insisted that it had probably happened on the way here. She supposed that she might have disturbed the wound when she was pulled by the chains. The gentleman was surprised that her body bled so often, and he was surprised that she was still alive. Maclart ordered the witch to describe in detail the appearance of the beast that bit her hand. The girl assured that the gentleman should not have bothered to catch that animal. The wolf would have died soon after responding once anyway. The Inquisitor asked how Vienna knew this for sure. She replied that this kind of thing always happened. Otherwise, she would have simply gone crazy. After all, exchanging feelings with so many animals was very difficult. Blue Eyes stared at the girl. The Inquisitor said he didn't understand. If she couldn't control the beast, why did she give up her body? To be torn apart for a short one-time connection. Vienna assured that this was the only way to predict the threat that was approaching these lands. It could have been a great flood, an earthquake, or landslides that only animals knew about. Meklart suddenly remembered what the priests told him. They claimed that witches were so unfortunate that even natural disasters spared them. Vienna assured the master that he had no reason to worry. She didn't know the time, but a day or two and that wolf would be finished. Meklart replied that if the witch had not lied, she could live here for now. The witch was surprised because these were the personal chambers of the Inquisitor. Inquisitor assured that there was nothing else to do but to stay close and watch Vienna to make sure she responded. The girl asked why the gentleman needed to look at this. After all, the response could have arisen at any moment of the day or night. Meklart assured that in that case, Vienna should have stayed here until it arose. He said that the witch could try to escape as many times as she wanted, but she could not leave this room without permission. Vienna was sitting on the floor against the wall. Her hands were cuffed, so she was uncomfortable. She was sleepy. At some point, a floorboard creaked. This disturbed her slumber. An involuntary cry escaped. The Inquisitor was heading for the door. He had a cloak over his shoulder. Vienna asked if he was leaving. The answer was affirmative. Meklart said he would be gone for only a couple of hours. He hoped that nothing strange would happen to the girl during that period. The Inquisitor took hold of the door handle with determination. Soon he was striding down the corridor. The gentleman went out into the palace courtyard. Life was in full swing there. Everything was going on as usual. On the ground lay a pair of stretchers, covered with a white sheet. Fresh blood showed through it in scarlet spots. A week had passed since Meklart had settled the Great Witch in his chambers. The witch had not slept a single time. The Inquisitor asked himself the question, why? And as if he was answering himself, assuming that she was trying to avoid a response in this way. He opened the door. The woman sat tied to a chair. She screamed. The guard recognized the Inquisitor and greeted him. Meklart asked if this was the witch that Glada had captured in the gorge. The woman wept and begged for mercy. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. Her whole body was shaking. She assured that only the Great Witch was the only one who possessed the true witch power. The victim assured that she and the other witches were innocent. The master asked if by unique power she meant the response of wild animals. The sufferer's face brightened. She was surprised and glad that the gentleman already knew everything. He confirmed it. Meklart asked why only the Great Witch was capable of responding. The woman hiccuped nervously, and then she said that it was for the sake of predicting the end of the world. The Great Witch was a sacrifice in the name of finding the beast that would provoke the end of the world. Meklart confidently stated that he considered the topic of the end of the world to be nothing more than nonsense. And the woman told him that for a long time a legend had been passed from mouth to mouth among witches. Someday a beast was bound to appear that would bring this world to destruction, and in order to prevent this, the witch had to find that beast with the help of the response. Mr. Meklart asked how the witches were going to find that creature. The prisoner insisted that if the beast did not die after responding to the witch's call, it would mean that it was the incarnation of the devil, intertwined with the witch. The Inquisitor asked what would happen after the witches found that beast. The woman hesitated, choosing her words. She said that by killing the Great Witch who bound the soul to this beast, the end of the world could be prevented. The man summed up what he had heard, that in order to stop the end of the world, the witches gradually fed the animals with the blood of the red-eyed girl, and when the beast that survives appears, her fellow tribeswomen will kill her. Clenched fists betrayed nervous tension. The man, having lost his self-control, rushed to strangle the prisoner. He was more prepared that she had thought of all this herself, harboring a grudge against the Great Witch. Meklart assured that the Great Witch had been captured. Now she had no way of finding the beast, and soon she would be consigned to the flames after that. He asked if there was no one left to stop the end of the world. Looking at the guillotine, he told his assistant that there was no longer any point in keeping her alive. The Inquisitor ordered the guards to sort things out themselves. He turned to leave. The woman asked him to wait. The tied captive began to shout after them that there was another Great Witch. Meklart stopped dead in his tracks. His blue eyes narrowed in disbelief as he stared at the witch. He said that according to rumors, the Great Witch was alone, and he asked if the liar had really decided to feed him fairy tales again. The woman stuttered and denied. She said that the essence of the Great Witch was transmitted through blood. But not long ago, the mother of the Great Witch gave birth to another child, and few people knew about this yet. Maclart wondered that if it was inherited by blood, then the mother must also have possessed the power. The witch, tied to a chair, was shaking all over. She insisted that having lost her gift, the red-eyed one's last duty was to leave descendants behind. The Inquisitor said that although the woman was a witch, she would hardly have been able to conceive on her own. And so the question arose as to who was the father. Tears rolled uncontrollably from the witch's eyes. Stammering, she told Maclart everything she knew. The words came with difficulty to her. The Inquisitor was clearly not ready to hear this. He rethought a lot of things, believing the witch's words. Old Witch said that it was impossible, and supposedly no one could know who exactly was the father of this child. The blood of a great witch is not suitable for everyone. Therefore, she must obtain the seed of different men until one of them gives birth to a child. The Inquisitor felt disgusted as he watched the witch grovel before him. He could partly understand Vienna's behavior. He had wondered before how the girl could leave her tribe so easily. It seemed that Vienna had easily severed all ties. But now, looking at the miserable fallen woman, the Inquisitor understood everything. This tribe did not deserve the sacrifice of the Great Witch. Now Maclart knew enough and needed no more information. He headed for the exit, ordering the executioner to finish the job. The witch tried to shout something after him, but the Inquisitor did not listen. As he left, he only heard groans and curses flying at his back. For a moment, the man felt sorry for Vienne. He even thought that it would be better for him not to know anything. The Inquisitor left the basement and headed towards his quarters. But only when he took hold of the door handle did Maclart hear someone calling. Turning around, he saw one of the guards. The man was clearly worried about something, but he did not dare to speak directly. The gentleman stopped and waited for the guard to approach. Only then did the Inquisitor inquire about the reason for the delay. The guard standing before him was desperately worried. His face was covered in large beads of sweat, and his eyes were feverishly shining. Finally, the man made up his mind. He asked how much longer the master was going to keep the witch in his castle. Such a question to the Grand Inquisitor was an unheard-of impudence. Therefore, it surprised Maclart quite a bit. He paused, raising his eyebrows haughtily. Then he asked the guard's purpose in asking this question. Then the man replied that the warriors no longer needed the services of the Great Witch. Her denunciations were not needed to cleanse Temfei. So it would be better if the Inquisitor took advantage of the opportunity after the visit of the High Priest. He would be able to return to the capital. After all, the other priests had been having endless conversations lately. Many believed that the Inquisitor was keeping the witch for personal purposes. Seeing Maclart's indignation, the guard immediately rushed to assure him of the soldier's loyalty. The warriors did not believe any of the gossip. However, many still did not understand why Inquisitor Maclart was willing to put up with gossip and backbiting because of a witch. This conversation was beginning to irritate the gentleman. His gaze was icy as he advised the guard not to rush to conclusions. After all, if the Inquisitor had sent the witch to the capital without being convinced of her abilities, it could have ended badly. There should be no mistake. The guard was confused. He did not understand the whole plan, but he obeyed his master and the Grand Inquisitor Maclar. And the owner firmly said that they were all just doing their job, and he advised them never to forget about their duty, giving in to emotions. Having finished the conversation, the man retired to his chambers. This day was very difficult and seemed endless, and now, wearily rubbing his face, he thought about what he had learned from the witch. It was also worth weighing every word of Vienna. She pointed to Glada Pass and Terran Hill for the last time. Both of these places turned out to be refugees. But this still did not give the Inquisitor any evidence. Merging with animals could have had nothing to do with it. The only animals Vienna could use in the dungeon were rats, which meant she could get information about a small area. However, the girl's knowledge extended to areas that the rats could not reach, which meant that she was hiding some other ability. All this had to be sorted out as soon as possible. After all, there wasn't much time left before the arrival of the Great Priest. Suddenly, Maclart remembered his own advice to the guard. He told the warrior to never forget his duty while being led by his emotions. All this was completely inopportune before the arrival of the Great Priest. The Lord Inquisitor was racking his brains, solving a difficult problem. As Inquisitor Maclart walked through the gallery, he noticed that the moon was full. This fact filled his soul with anxiety. The man opened the door and entered his chambers. There was a strange, tense silence. Maclart became wary. As he passed the table, he grabbed the sword lying on it and called out to Vienne. The girl did not respond. This was strange. And then the man noticed long strands of hair scattered across the carpet. Coming closer, he saw a beautiful witch. The girl was lying right on the carpet at his feet. The witch didn't move, and didn't even react to the sound of his heavy steps. Inquisitor Maclart frowned in alarm and came closer. Only then did he hear Vienna's quiet breathing and light snoring. A whole week passed, and finally the girl fell asleep right on the floor, despite the shackles and other inconveniences. Now she was fast asleep, her shackled hands tucked under her cheek. In her sleep, the witch's face was as beautiful and defenseless as a child's. Suddenly, a groan escaped her lips. Vienna clenched her teeth as if in pain. A moment later, her entire body was seized with a spasm. Without waking up, the girl arched her back and screamed. The Inquisitor looked at her, his brows furrowed sternly. He realized that he was seeing the beginning of the girl's merging with the animal. The man remembered asking Vienna about it. He was very interested in what it looked like and whether her sleep was different from usual. Then the girl said that merging with an animal can be easily determined. After all, the bite site begins to bleed. Remembering this, Maclart jumped up to the witch and grabbed her hand. With all his strength, he tore off the bandage covering the wound. The thin sheet spread under his fingers. White, tender skin was exposed. Among the old scars, a fresh wound stood out with bright scarlet blood. Now Inquisitor Maclart knew exactly what he was seeing. At that moment, right before his eyes, the fusion of the witch and the animal was taking place. The girl's body was thrashing at his feet. She was breathing heavily. Tears were streaming from her eyes. The man looked at her with wide eyes. It was hard for him to even imagine the torment the beautiful witch was experiencing at that moment. Maclart tried to imagine the exact number of scars that crisscrossed the girl's body. It was simply impossible to go through all of them so many times. Suddenly, something subtly changed. The Inquisitor became alert, sniffing the air. A strange sweetish smell appeared from somewhere in the chambers. It was a bit like the aroma of strong wine. This seemed to be another of the characteristic signs of the beginning of the merger. It was at this moment that the witch must have felt like an animal. Maclart leaned over Vianne, who was fast asleep. Her brows were furrowed and her arms and legs were twitching slightly. Large beads of sweat were visible on the girl's face. This could not be called a calm and serene sleep. And at this time, the beautiful witch felt like a wild forest wolf. He flew swiftly through the forest thicket. The animal's eyes glowed with an angry scarlet fire. Drops of saliva fell from its open mouth with bared fangs. The wolf headed towards a clearing at the edge of the forest. There, on a fallen tree, a woodcutter sat alone in front of a fire. The wolf looked at him from behind a tree and rushed forward, his strong paws carrying his powerful body forward without restraint. Jumping out into the clearing, the wolf soared upward in a decisive rush. In a moment, he would inevitably sink his fangs into the throat of a defenseless man. And suddenly, a few centimeters before the target, his jump was interrupted. The blade of a short dagger pierced the beast's right side. A second later, it was all over. The beast lay lifeless on the ground. Its bared jaws could no longer harm anyone. With a fading gaze, the wolf saw the people surrounding him. The woodcutter standing in front leaned over and pulled his dagger out of his victim. At the same time, Vienna opened her eyes with a groan, her pupils unnaturally dilated, and tears streaming down her face. The girl pressed her hands to her face and moaned that she felt something terrible. But these were not her feelings, but the feelings of the beast that had merged with her. She was a beast that attacked a woodcutter, but she did not want to kill a man. That desire belonged to the wolf, not the witch. But feeling like a murderer was too scary. And now Vienna couldn't calm down. Inquisitor Maclart shook her by the shoulders, trying to bring her to her senses. But the girl had just felt her own death and only moaned. She was completely out of her mind, and the man had no choice but to shake her harder and shout sharply. Then the beautiful witch finally looked up at him. There was still boundless horror in her eyes, but she recognized him. Seeing that Vienna was beginning to come to her senses, the gentleman loosened his hands a little. After that, he allowed the girl to carefully lower herself onto the carpet. The Inquisitor asked her if she had seen any dreams. The girl barely audibly answered in the affirmative. Then Maclart asked her what exactly she had dreamed about. But Vienna didn't want to tell. She only let it slip that there was nothing special in the dream. Then her throat tightened with excitement. Vienna began to cough. Seeing this, the man decided to give her a little drink. Turning around, he saw a cup of water on the table and reached out his hand to it. Standing directly in front of Vienne, the Inquisitor handed her the cup. The man's face was impassive, but his eyes were gleaming with anxiety. He brought the cup closer to the beautiful witch. and she stretched out her hands to it. Her fingers trembled violently and her voice was muffled and broken. The girl thanked the gentleman and took the cup. However, she could not hold it because of the trembling. The cup tilted dangerously. It almost fell from Vienna's weak fingers. However, at the last moment Maclart caught the vessel. The man put the cup back into her hands. However, he did not remove his own, holding the witch's trembling fingers. She reached for the water with dry lips. Blood was still trickling down her raised, shackled hands. Inquisitor Maclart looked at her carefully. There was a lot in his gaze: irritation, compassion, and concern. He suddenly removed his hands and moved away. Looking down, the man coldly remarked that she was too much trouble, and suddenly a key flashed in his hand. Vienna froze, afraid to believe her eyes, and suddenly Maclart unfastened the shackles from her hands and took them off. After that, he simply told her to finally drink some water. The girl looked up at him. She was still sitting right on the carpet, and the Inquisitor towered over her with all his power. Seeing her look, he very reservedly said that she shouldn't invent anything for herself. He was simply irritated by the endless clanging of the shackles. Vienna looked at him timidly. She was happy to be free of the hated shackles even for a little while, so she simply agreed. While she was drinking, the man stood opposite and watched. He was already in complete control of himself, so that nothing could be read on his face. The girl drank some water and sighed with relief. She felt much better and her cough subsided. Then the Inquisitor took the cup and put it on the table. He involuntarily noticed that small spots of blood were darkening on the rim. Turning back to the girl, he continued his questioning. Maclart needed to know what happened next. Guiltily lowering her eyes, Vienna replied that the wolf had come across a man in the forest and was about to attack him. However, he was stopped by a group of people. To this, Maclart noted that this wolf had already been seen very close to the castle. However, he was interested in the fact that people had made a camp at the edge of the forest. It was strange. But what seemed even stranger was that these were experienced hunters who killed the beast with one blow of a dagger. The girl's story did not inspire confidence in the Inquisitor. He decided that she was not worth trusting. The man turned away. But then the witch tried to grab him by the hem of his cloak and began to assure him that she was telling the truth. Seeing the gentleman's distrust, the girl tried to remember at least something else. Suddenly it dawned on her. The Inquisitor had already grabbed the door handle when Vienna screamed after him. She remembered that the people from the forest had strange black eyes. Maclart stopped. Without turning around, he asked again. The man wanted to make sure that he had really heard something about black eyes, and Vienna firmly replied that she remembered it very well, and it was not an accident at all. All those people she saw through the wolf's eyes in his last moments of life had very black eyes. That's why she remembered. Then the Inquisitor thought. The Great Witch had never left the lands of Temfei, which meant she could not know anything about the monster people of Ifan. The man approached Vienna again, who was sitting on the floor. She looked up at him submissively and a little frightened. Maclart looked at the cup again, his gaze once again caught by the bloody imprint on the rim. He was right where the witch's lips touched the vessel. The man slowly turned his gaze to the girl's face. She looked straight at him, tense and expectant. Her lips were slightly stained with blood. And then the Inquisitor felt that same sweetish smell again. This time it was so strong and dense that he wanted to taste it. Suddenly the man dropped to the floor right in front of the witch. He said that the girl had not lied and could indeed merge with an animal with her blood. Maclart held the cup with the bloody imprint of Vienna's lips in his hand and looked at it thoughtfully. Now he believed in the power of the witch's blood. The girl's heart sank from an incomprehensible anxiety and immediately began to beat twice as fast. Her eyes widened with an anxious premonition, and the Inquisitor, sitting opposite her on the carpet and holding a cup with traces of blood, looked straight at her. He wanted to know what could happen to a person. Vienna screamed and reached for the cup, and Maclart asked what would happen to him if he drank the blood of the Great Witch. The girl muttered something, stumbling and shaking. She was stylishly scared, and tears were running down her cheeks. Rushing towards the Inquisitor, Vienna tried to stop him, screaming that he would become a demon. Intercepting his hand with the cup, the girl repeated more quietly. According to her, a person who drank her blood would lose his mind and become a demon. Hearing this, the Inquisitor froze for a moment and immediately raised the cup higher. He was significantly taller than Vienna, even sitting on the floor. The girl reached out to him with her whole body, trying to get the cup. And then she ran into the gentleman's cold gaze. Now the beautiful witch was looking straight at him. The man felt something strange, as if a fragrant scarlet haze had enveloped him. The two were all alone in the large chambers, lit only by the fire in the fireplace. However, something invisible to the eye, magical, was in the air between them. It only lasted a few seconds before the Inquisitor shook off the spell. He coldly stated that he was not at all surprised. Now that he knew that witches' blood was poison to humans, he became even more stern. Straightening up, Maclart looked at the girl with condemnation, nodding to some thoughts of his own. The man buttoned up his shirt collar and turned away. His thoughts were already somewhere far away. Taking a sword in its sheath from the table, the gentleman called out to the guard. He instructed the guard who came to the call to call Dr. Pepin. Vienna looked at him, frightened and sad. She didn't know what else the Inquisitor could have thought of. Seeing that the man was already heading for the exit, Vienna dared to address him. The girl said that the gentleman had seen the fusion process. This was why he kept the witch in his chambers. So now the girl could be returned to her room in the dungeon. But Maclart refused. Now Vienna seemed to him like a living container of poison, and that meant that letting her go would be simply dangerous. The girl lowered her head sadly. Immediately becoming sad, she quietly said that then the Inquisitor himself should stay away from her. She sank to the floor again, and then, seeing the unfastened shackles in front of her, she realized that the master had not put the shackles back on her. Vienna timidly reminded Inquisitor Maclart about the handcuffs. After all, according to the rules, she had to be in them at all times. The girl had already stretched out her hand to give the shackles to the master, but he offered her to keep them as a reward for her obedience. Seeing her surprised look, the man advised the beautiful witch not to think about stupid things and to enjoy even the little things. This was already a concession. Vienna thought she had misheard or misunderstood him. She hesitantly asked him what he meant. Apparently, Inquisitor Maclart was no longer going to put the shackles on her. The girl watched him go and felt a strange feeling. She recalled how everyone around her treated her with disgust and hostility. The guards avoided even the slightest touch. And then Vienna said sadly that she understood everything. Of course, Maclart considered her a second-class citizen, the scum of society. But at the same time, it was he who treated her best of all. The man was always the most humane and humane. Hearing this, the Inquisitor froze without turning around. And then the voice of Dr. Pepin was heard from the corridor. The doctor opened the door and walked in. He quickly apologized for being late, but Maclart walked past him silently as if he hadn't noticed the newcomer. The door closed behind him. Now in the chambers were only the young witch and Dr. Pepin, frozen in surprise. The man sniffed and declared that the aura in the chambers was simply murderous. Then he began to ask discontentedly what the witch had done. The girl didn't know what to answer. And Dr. Pepin said that the gentleman was clearly angry, so the reason was only in her. Vienna began to assure the doctor that she had done nothing of the sort. The girl really did not know the reason for her master's anger. But the doctor could not guess anything either. At that very moment, Inquisitor Maclart went to his office. The commander of the guards was already waiting for him there. He reported to the master that traces of a camp that had been abandoned in a hurry had been discovered near the castle. The guards had already set dogs on the trail. The Inquisitor thought about it. Few would dare to set up camp near his castle. The commander, seeing his thoughtfulness, suggested sending more soldiers. However, Maclart replied that he would go in pursuit himself. He was the master of his land and had to find out for himself who dared to violate his property. The commander of the guards bowed humbly. The warriors knew their business well, and they knew who they were subordinate to. Therefore, no one would argue with the master. Finally, the visitor left, leaving the Inquisitor alone. The slamming of the door again awakened memories. Maclart couldn't help but hear Vienna's voice when she remarked on his humanity. The man wasn't too pleased with himself. He knew that his rank and position obliged him to do many things, and he simply had no right to expose himself to doubts and weaknesses. The man remembered standing before the great priest during his initiation, who had told Maclart to always be cool and remember his duty. The priests always noted his extraordinary abilities. No one doubted that the Inquisitor was truly filled with divine power. However, many understood that it was extremely difficult for the human subconscious to cope with such a load. Therefore, constant control was needed, and Inquisitor Maclart learned to control himself very well. One of the ways was regular blows of the whip. While being lashed, he kept repeating that he existed only to serve God. The pain prevented him from rising and brought him back to humility. Maclart was diligent in everything and always. The same was true for the whipping. The result was a multitude of scars that crisscrossed the master's back. Thanks to this, the Inquisitor had been in constant control of himself for many years. And now, fighting with the captured monstermen, he was unperturbed. Finally, it was all over. The bodies of the fallen enemies covered the ground like a bloody carpet. Macklart lowered his sword and exhaled wearily. Suddenly, he thought that the blood had a completely nauseating smell. However, the man had never paid attention to this before. It seemed that something had changed in him just now, and the appearance of the beautiful witch was clearly somehow connected with this. The Inquisitor involuntarily recalled her bloody lips, and the numerous wounds, fresh and old, that covered her tender body. These strange thoughts were suddenly interrupted by the guard commander. The warrior reported that the squad had eliminated all the remaining monsters on the other side. It remained to decide what to do with the corpses of the enemies. Macklart ordered their heads to be hung on the fortress wall. All the witches caught in the Glada Gorge were also to be sent there. The Inquisitor had no pity for them. After completing the campaign, the detachment returned to the castle. The soft setting sun painted its walls golden pink. Not noticing the beauty surrounding him, the Inquisitor headed towards the castle gates. And suddenly he saw a man in front of him. He greeted him affably. They hadn't seen each other for quite some time, but Macklart didn't show any particular joy at the meeting. The man in the snow-white robe lifted the veil covering his head and smiled. It was the great priest. The Inquisitor showed no sign of displeasure. His gloved hand only clenched into a fist. The visit of the great priest was most inopportune. Nevertheless, the man dropped to one knee and pressed his lips to the priest's hand. The priest looked at the Inquisitor tenderly. At the same time, in the Inquisitor's chambers, Vienna was sitting on the carpet by the fireplace. She put her hands closer to the fire, enjoying its warmth. The girl looked thoughtfully at her scars and thought. She hoped that if she behaved correctly, then everything could work out, and then perhaps she would have managed to escape. However, suddenly an inexplicable feeling of anxiety appeared in her soul. Hearing a sharp sound, the witch looked out the window. There, high in the sky, huge black birds were circling. Their cries sent shivers down her spine. 2 guards accompanied the great witch. Today, on the occasion of the meeting with the high priest, the girl was dressed in an expensive dress of scarlet velvet. But having dressed her in expensive clothes did not suddenly begin to treat her differently. They hurried her along the way, and when they got to the door, they roughly pushed her into the chambers. The high priest and Inquisitor Macklart were just talking about her. The face of the honored guest from the capital expressed amazement at the sight of the pretty witch. The priest came up from behind and pressed on the back of the captive's head. He ordered her to show respect to the great priest. Having overcome the resistance, the man forcibly lowered Vienne's head to the floor face down. The girl screamed. The high priest ordered not to press her so hard. He quoted that the Lord God was merciful to all who repent. The witch looked up at the handsome stranger with her amazing red eyes, confused. The priest approached the girl. Sitting down next to her, he began to examine her closely. He was surprised that she was bleeding and reached out to the witch's face. But Macklart grabbed her wrist in time, warned her of the danger. The priests were watching the scene from a distance and considered such behavior inappropriate. The priest assured him that he was very touched by how much Macklart cared for him, but he asked him not to do that again, and he stepped away from him. The guest said that he wanted for the common good to take a good look at this witch. Macklart frowned, wondering what the priest meant by look closely. He replied that he wanted to talk to the witch face to face, and asked to free up a room for this, and also to prepare something to eat. Vienna was still sitting on the floor, her red eyes pleading with Macklart, silently asking him not to leave her alone with the stranger. The owner of these lands flashed his blue eyes. He firmly declared that he would stay with them. The priest was surprised. He called out Merklat's name with a note of reproach. He asked not to force him to repeat it twice. The Inquisitor remembered the face of the great priest many years ago. It was he who had beaten him with whips, repeating that he existed only for God. And the priest was already leaving the room, and he called the witch to follow him. The guard brought up the rear. Vienna turned around and looked at the gentleman with a hunted look. He stood nearby, clenching his fists tightly in an attempt to restrain himself. Soon the great priest and the great witch were sitting at a long table laden with exquisite dishes. The girl took advantage of the opportunity to eat normal food for a long time during her imprisonment. Choking, she began to cough. The priest assumed that it was difficult to eat in his presence, and he handed her a glass filled with red wine. Vienna was timid, but the man insisted. The young witch carefully sipped the grape drink, but she was ordered to drink it to the bottom. Soon the glass was empty. Vienne's vision began to swim, and her head began to spin. The high priest, watching the young girl, chuckled. He said that sometimes hops help to get rid of unnecessary excitement. The man asked in a sweet, ingratiating voice. Was the interlocutor now ready to answer the questions of a high-ranking person? The girl did not understand what the priest was leading all this to, and he first asked how her hand was and whether it had recovered from the bite. Vienna remembered those 2 wolves. She shuddered from the terrible visions. Stuttering slightly, she answered affirmatively. The man assumed that the witch could have gotten used to this by now. After all, upon arrival, her body was covered with numerous bite marks. Vienna was thinking about her own. She wondered how much was known to the high priest. The girl understood that Dr. Pepin was examining her. But what was more important was how much Maclart, who knew about the response, had said in his report. The young witch replied that these were merely traces of devil worship. The priest said that there was no need to try to hide them. He assured that God was magnanimous, and that he granted the path to salvation to those who came with repentance. But Vienna said that her recent answer was all she could say. The high priest groaned heavily and long. The distinguished guest said he was disappointed. He stated that he knew how she communicated with animals through blood. The young witch screamed that it was a force sent by the devil, but the priest insisted that it was not so important who gave the force. What was important was for what purposes it was used. He offered to kneel before him, promising that this would put an end to all her suffering. He said that at her request he could even order the witch hunt to be stopped. The girl couldn't believe her ears and even asked again. The priest confirmed his firm intention to spare the supreme witch and all her fellow tribeswomen. The pupils of the unique red eyes narrowed. Through carelessness, Vienne knocked over a glass. It fell with a clang and broke into pieces. The high priest asked with emphasis in his voice whether the witch would swear to use her power only at his command. Our heroine could not even imagine that such a frightening offer would be made to her by the high priest himself. Vienna's eyes widened and she thought with horror that the situation was getting worse than ever. The priest tried to stop Maclart, saying that he could not enter now. But the knight was determined, and despite the attempts to keep him out, he opened the doors abruptly. The high priest looked back at the man who had entered. He smiled indulgently and in a commanding tone ordered the priest to step forward. Maclart's face was stern. He asked the high priest dryly what he had been talking about with the great witch. The guest assumed that the knight's insight was more accurate than Pepin's, and he wanted to hear him out first. The priest believed that this child could be useful to them. Maclart reminded that this woman was a great witch. The guest theatrically grabbed his heart area. He replied that the great witch was extremely sweet and beautiful. The knight asked if that was why the priest was not going to hand the girl over to him. After all, they still needed her denunciations. The priest found Maclart's actions extremely curious. He replied that he was merely warning against a creature with which one must be extremely careful. The Supreme asked if it really looked like a warning. The knight's answer was affirmative. The priest believed that Maclart had been bewitched. The knight, with clenched fists, angrily denied it. The Supreme suggested that it was a test sent by God. The owner of the land asked why the servant of God showed such interest in the power of the devil. The priest asked if he really thought God was absolutely good. He asked how God could be exclusively merciful. The guest stood in front of the painting. Turning around with a smile, he reminded that the devil was also the son of God. The knight stated that if the witch's power was needed, there was another descendant that had recently been born, and he promised to catch her for the high priest if there was a need. And he thought that he was going to keep it a secret until the truth was confirmed. The priest was surprised. Maclart assured that he himself had learned about it not so long ago, and he was going to send people to look for her. The servant of God agreed, and assured that their conversation would take place again when the knight found that descendant. He bowed as he said goodbye. When Maclart had almost reached the door, the priest assured him that they had the same interest, and the blood could not be deceived. Having closed the door, the inquisitor walked with wide strides. Soon he was already opening another room, decisively throwing open the doors. The captive was sitting by the fire right on the floor, with her legs tucked in. Vienna was looking at the fire. Hearing footsteps, she stood up abruptly. The girl asked if the inquisitor would stop the witch hunt and burn all the witches of Temfe. There were tears in Vienna's red eyes, and her fingers were covered in blood. She asked if he would destroy absolutely every descendant of the great witch. Maclart commanded the witch not to dare mix her dirty personal interests with God's calling. The Inquisition was not about her revenge. Vienna laughed, lowering her head and hiding her face behind her hair. After all, from the very beginning, the reason for her interrogations was personal interests, and she demanded that he say that he no longer needed her denunciations. Maclard assured that he had not said that there was no need for them. The knight asked if the witch really hoped to be released afterwards. He did not know what words. The high priest could have encouraged the captive, but it was possible to abandon empty hopes. The girl raised her eyes to him. How many emotions were read in them? Maclard ordered the witch to stretch out her leg. He was going to fasten the shackles on her. The young witch looked huntedly at the heavy iron shackles that he was already carrying, rattling the chains. There were scars on her hand from the handcuffs. Viana said it was a gentlemanly thing to do, but the Inquisitor didn't like her sarcasm. The girl stretched out her leg, offering it to fasten the shackles. She expressed her joy that Maclard was responsible for her. The chief knight fastened an iron ring with a chain on her leg. He laughed at her words about gentlemanliness. The witch lifted him up, the shining look of red eyes. Putting her hand to her heart, she said that he had unshakable piety, and then she buried her face in his chest. Maclard called out to the great witch. Then he called her name loudly, but the flushed girl did not open her eyes. Here the Inquisitor smelled alcohol, and then he saw an empty decanter and a glass nearby. He should have guessed. After all, the great priest always suppressed his opponent in this way. The knight carefully placed Vianne on the sofa. He did it as if nothing in the world was so fragile and precious. The girl was fast asleep. Her cheeks were flushed. Maclard admired her, and then he began to reproach himself for having spent only a couple of days in languor. And now he drooled just looking at the color red. He compared himself to a trained animal. He suddenly wondered if Pepin also smelled that sweet scent, and if that was the reason for the doctor's unbridled lust. The Inquisitor stood up, decided it was better to have the opportunity to deal with this right now. The next day, Maclard sat across from the Great Witch with a table with a map between them. He was surprised that Vianne had been looking for so long. He assumed there was no one else to inform on. The girl answered negatively, and she thought that she was simply deciding what she had to choose. After all the remaining shelters were located far from the Rave Fortress, and the further the distance, the longer Maclard himself would be absent. The girl was afraid that during this time the great priest might try to do something to her. But still the witch had no other alternatives. She said, "Ain Gorge," and pointed to the place on the map with her finger. There was a knock at the door. The knight hurried to take the map and rolled it up. Loudly he ordered them to come in. Dr. Pepin greeted the Inquisitor with a smile. He had a message from the high priest, and he said that the great priest hoped that he would fulfill the agreement as soon as possible. The witch was alarmed by those words, and Maclard asked the doctor to tell him that he would leave within 3 days. Pepin acted submissive for the sake of appearances, and as if suddenly remembering, he told the Inquisitor that he would like to take a little walk with the witch. Maclard asked in an angry tone what the doctor was planning to do again. He replied that the high priest was supposedly worried about the pale-faced witch, that it was as if the girl lacked sunlight. The knight was indignant. After all, as soon as the high priest arrived, Pepin immediately fluffed up his feathers and asked if he understood what would happen if he will try to do something stupid again. The doctor promised that this time he and the witch would really just take a walk and come back. Maclard gave his permission, but in exchange he wanted to assign a soldier. The doctor was forced to agree, and the witch watched everything with fear in her eyes. Pepin called her to come with him. Viana consoled herself that everything would remain fine until she and the doctor were alone. A metal collar was placed around the neck of the great witch. Soon Pepin was walking with the girl on a chain in the middle of the courtyard. The soldier reminded them that Mr. Maclard had forbidden them to leave the fortress walls, and he demanded that they stop. Pepin assured that not enough sunlight was getting in through the high walls. The man in uniform said that he had received such orders. Then someone shouted to get out of the way. A loaded cart was coming, it was worth stepping aside. It seemed that the soldier assigned to the Great Witch hesitated a little and fell behind a little. Pepin immediately decided to take advantage of this opportunity. He pulled the witch's chain around her neck with force. He called on the girl to quickly run away with him. The force the doctor applied was excessive. The collar on Viana's thin neck dug into the delicate skin, injuring it. The soldier ordered them to stop, but his armor did not allow such maneuverability, and he hopelessly fell behind. And Pepin had already managed to jump out of the fortress gates with the witch on a leash. He was glad that he could now show the witch something like this. A similar thought had visited him ever since the high priest ordered the witch to be taken out for a walk. The doctor was in a state of euphoria, and he called on the great witch to raise her head up. Viana looked up, squinting against the bright light, and on the wall hung the bloody bodies of witches. The girl thought that one of those faces was familiar to her. That witch was always near her mother. Pepin firmly grabbed the red-eyed woman by the shoulder. He said that if she did not interest the great priest, then she could end up the same way. He advised her to stop racking her brains and to fall down obediently. The girl trembled all over. A crow landed on one of the heads of the murdered witches. The bird let out a cry that seemed to freeze the soul. Pepin said that for the first time in a long time they had arrested. The witch was brought in alive. The doctor leaned close to Viana's ear and asked if it was worth telling her something interesting. Maclart asked again if they had really gone beyond the fortress. The soldier said that Dr. Pepin had decided to do so without permission. The Inquisitor gently touched Viana's shoulder. The girl recoiled from him in fear. The gentleman ordered the soldier to leave. He obediently obeyed the Inquisitor. Soon Maclart was left alone with the witch. He began to ask what they were doing outside the fortress. Viana was silent. The knight began to get angry and demanded an answer. He asked if she had shared blood with the beast again, or with Dr. Pepin. The girl looked at him. She said in a quiet, trembling voice that she had seen corpses hanging on the fortress wall. She recognized the witch who had recently been arrested and then hanged, and she was grateful to the Inquisitor for choosing her instead. Maclart realized that the doctor was too talkative. He asked if the girl knew what the witch wanted to report. She answered negatively. Viana also knew that if that witch's words had any value, she would be the one hanging on the fortress wall right now. Her body was shaking. Maclart asked her to raise her head. He touched her face. There was worry in his eyes. With a deft movement, he unfastened the collar. He began to examine the witch's neck. He noticed that the skin there was worn away. The knight assumed that Pepin had done it. He began to swear and get angry at the doctor. But the witch hurried to calm him down and assured him that she herself did it out of surprise. Maclart asked her to stand still. Then he pulled down her dress over her, crying. The damaged skin there was burning with inflammation. The girl thought that Pepin had been dragging her around all day, using the walk as an excuse. Of course, there were traces. The Inquisitor gently touched her shoulder. Viana felt extremely awkward and mentally wondered how much longer he was going to watch. Maclart said there shouldn't be a scar. He pressed his finger slightly and the girl screamed in pain. She tried to push the Inquisitor's hand away from her. She said that he had hurt her, but then she came to her senses and apologized. The knight announced that there would be dinner. Soon they were sitting at a table covered with various dishes. Maclart was looking through the documents, and the great witch sat at the table in complete confusion. The girl thought that the Inquisitor wanted to fatten her up so that she would burn longer at the future burning ceremony. The knight glanced sideways at the captive and began reading again. The girl could not resist greedily attacking the food. 3 days later, on the day of departure, Maclart came to the great witch. The girl was lying on the floor. He ordered to rise. In his hands were already prepared shackles for escorting the criminal. The Inquisitor led Viana through the courtyard of the fortress. Many people turned around to look at them with caution. The girl assumed that they had finally decided to return her to the underground dungeon. She squinted from the bright sunlight and covered her eyes with her hand. The great witch did not understand what was happening, and the Inquisitor opened the lock on the cage in front of her. Maclart explained that the witch would be going with him on this expedition. This had already been reported to the high priest. It appeared that Viana would be taken on a witch hunt. The day before, the priest asked him why he needed the witch. He assured him that he did not understand the logic of Maclart's actions. The knight assured that it was necessary for the matter he had mentioned earlier. The servant of God took pity on him, and it was a series that eventually he accepted God's test. And now, standing by the cage, Maclart dryly told the captive that she would be needed. Soon the carts set off. One after another in a chain, they rode harnessed to a pair of horses or to 4 horses. The Inquisitor rode on horseback. Dr. Pepin accompanied the procession nearby. Viana felt unwell in the cage. She was breathing heavily and sighing. Later, she even began to hold on to the bars to keep from falling from severe dizziness. But then the view through the bars of the cage caught the girl's attention. She craned her neck, still giving herself over to contemplation, even forgetting my recent poor health. Crows circled above the bare trees. With wide-open eyes, she suddenly saw a picture. Against the background of fire, a knight raised his weapon above the woman's head. The witch did not know how the Inquisitors appeared there. It seemed that even in the cage, the hands of the witches who had died here reached out to the girl. They asked in a whisper why Viana had betrayed them. Hundreds of voices were calling the great witch, repeating her name over and over again. She covered her ears so as not to hear them, but it did not help. The voices were in her head. The knight opened the door of her grate, said that they would stop here today, ordered the witch to get out. 2 carts pulled by pairs of horses stood side by side on the wasteland. A man led a captive on a chain from a cage. Vienna walked barefoot on the dry ground. She was weak and dizzy, holding onto the bars. The knight said it was all her doing. The girl herself understood this perfectly well. That's why she didn't want to come here at all. The moans of the dead earth were blocking her ears. Macklart led the Great Witch into a temporary tent. He called her to the table on which the map was spread out. The girl asked herself a question. It was strange. After all, in the denunciation she had indicated the Ain Gorge, and she did not understand why the final destination was the Taiki Plain. Meanwhile, the Inquisitor placed the chess pieces on the map, thus marking the places that Vienna had indicated earlier. He asked if they had relied on her. Denunciations of the power of witchcraft. Macklart was interested in whether the Great Witch would be able to use her power to find someone specific. The girl assured that in her denunciations, she relied on her own knowledge of the witch's hiding places. She insisted that the Ain Gorge had become a witch's hideout no more than 2 months ago, and she wondered how the Inquisitor knew such details. Macklart took a step closer to the girl. He found it funny that she was suggesting that Kieran would depend on her denunciations until the very end. And now it didn't matter what kind of magic the Great Witch used. She would just die anyway. But if with his help the girl finds the one the Inquisitor wanted, it will be a completely different story. Vienna timidly asked who they were talking about. The Inquisitor wanted to find the mother of the Great Witch, the one who carried and gave birth to Vienna herself. Macklart knew that her mother had recently given birth to another Great Witch. The girl remembered the words of her fellow tribesmen that Vienna's mother would no longer be able to give birth. The woman had supposedly exhausted the value of her existence. The little red-eyed girl was confused, and the woman said that the birth of a new Great Witch meant the decline of the power of the witch who preceded her. Tears stood in Vienna's eyes, and the witch said that her birth marked the end of her mother. She blamed the baby for that. The woman began to strangle the child in rage. She said that the time would come when she would be replaced too, and the attack would go on forever. Such was fate. Vienna covered her ears, trying to hide from the voices. She thought that she needed to find and kill the new Great Witch. Otherwise, her efforts were useless. Meanwhile, Macklart decided that the girl had doubted, and he reminded her that she herself had begged to cleanse the world of the Great Witch, right down to her descendant. The Inquisitor loomed over the girl. At that moment, her head, overflowing with thoughts, suddenly cleared up. The blue flame of Chiron, the man, capable of turning all the devil's minions into a handful of ashes, a servant of the Lord who will betray any evil in the blink of an eye. Vienna sold her tribeswomen and herself to this man to escape, so it was worth trusting him. After all, he could put an end to all this. The girl believed that he could save her from this fate. She asked if she found it. Would the Inquisitor personally burn it all? Macklart saw that same expression on her face again. It was as if the girl had already renounced everything, but still desperately desired and believed that the night would make her dream come true. He answered affirmatively. The witch, with determination in her voice, promised that she would definitely find it. The Great Witch lay curled up with a tray of untouched food next to her. The girl remembered a recent conversation with Macklart. He assured her that besides her, the witch had given birth to another Great Witch. She understood that there was left not much time, and if the Inquisitor hadn't lied, then the mother and child needed to be found and killed before the response power disappeared. She remembered standing at the entrance to the cave as a girl, and then she saw what children were not supposed to know. Her mother was surrounded by many men. They caressed her body, covering it with kisses. They brought new ones again and again. The goal was to give birth to as many Great Witches as possible. Vienna understood that even if that child survived, he was destined to suffer the same terrible fate as she had suffered at the hands of the Great Witch. And if so, it was better to get rid of her with my own hands. This child was doomed either to torment or death. The caged carriage moved on. Vienna was jolted and hit hard against the bars, screaming involuntarily. The captive looked at her bruised hand, and she thought that by the time she arrived, her whole body could have turned into a big solid bruise. Soon the carriage stopped. The accompanying knight informed that the Great Witch had been summoned, and he commanded her to get out. The boy was leading the girl on a chain. Approaching the gentleman, he said that he had brought him a Great Witch. Macklart, without turning around, thanked him briefly and allowed him to go. The assistant hurried away. The Inquisitor informed Vienne that they would soon arrive at the Ain Gorge. He asked if the witch could confirm with her power where her mother was now. The girl said that she needed time, about 3 days. The Inquisitor refused her because that was out of the question. The time frame she had given was too long. Vienna assured that if she were left alone she could manage in a quarter of an hour. But if the Inquisitor was not ready for that, then there was no time. More will be needed. Maclard asked again how he could leave the captive alone. And he asked if he gave the witch 8 hours. Was she sure she would be able to get the information? Vienna answered positively. And she thought to herself that they would certainly not leave her alone, and she would have to concentrate as much as possible in order to manage in 3 days. The Inquisitor agreed, to her surprise. However, in exchange, the witch would have to be on a closed cliff, where she would be easy to track. Maclard gave the order to proceed as soon as everything was ready, and abruptly walked past the girl, leaving her alone. Vienna watched the Inquisitor go. He was the one who hated the evil spirits more than anyone else, and yet he was a man. The 2 doctors informed the Inquisitor that time was up. Pepin could not believe that he had left the witch for so long. Another colleague of his said it was risky, even if it was about finding a great witch. Maclard said it was worth going and checking. The doctor asked to be allowed to do so. Maclard ordered him dryly to be ready. The Inquisitor walked along the rocky path, asking himself what he was thinking, leaving the captive witch alone. After all, even if it was the top of a cliff, no one knew what a witch driven into a dead end was capable of. But that expression on Vienna's face when she swore to exterminate all the witches seemed sincere. Maybe that's why he subconsciously believed that the girl would not run away or kill herself. That's what the Inquisitor thought as he walked to the place where he had left the captive great witch 8 hours earlier. But what he saw exceeded all his expectations. Vienna stood on the edge of a cliff. There were a lot of crows around. The wind was blowing her hair, and one bird was sitting on her hand and seemed to be saying something to the girl. Maclard even admired the witch, but then a pebble from under his feet rolled noisily, revealing the presence of a person, and thus, having frightened the entire flock of birds, the idyll that had so enchanted him just a second ago was broken. Vienna only then noticed the appearance of the Inquisitor. It seemed to disconcert her a little. Maclard thought that he had undoubtedly gone mad. The girl assured that she had found her, and the Inquisitor thought that this red-eyed witch had suddenly appeared to him as a deity. She seemed so holy that Maclard had momentarily wished to be trampled by her. Vienna claimed that her mother was on the plain of Tyche. The Inquisitor could not forgive himself for how disgusting and immoral it was. The flames of Chiron's blue fire rose into the sky, and the fire quickly engulfed the village. The locals screamed and begged for mercy, but the knights carried out their work relentlessly. On the cliff, Vienna sadly watched the burning of the village. Dr. Pepin sarcastically asked how she felt. He hastened to remind the Great Witch that this hell was happening because of her. Dr. Pepin noticed a wound on Vienne's lip. He reminded her that the Inquisitor had been overreacting to the witch's wounds lately. To the girl's surprise, he took out a handkerchief and hurried to wipe the blood from her lip. The doctor suggested that Vienna was not used to being appeased. That's why she deliberately bites her lips. He suggested that she wants to leave wounds on her body. Vienna abruptly waved his hand away. Pepin immediately reminded the witch of her situation. He advised the captive not to forget herself, having spent a couple of days near the Inquisitor. The doctor said he could push her right off the cliff into the burning village and the screaming villagers, and then he saw the blue fire below. At that moment, Maclard appeared. The girl looked at him with hope, but Pepin was clearly displeased with this appearance and quickly took the witch back to the camp. Vienna sat in the cage. Sadly, she reasoned that it was Maclard who helped her. After all, he had already helped her with blue fire before. Just at that time, he looked in on the girl. Vienna did not understand what the Inquisitor was doing here until the end of the hunt. Maclard ordered to follow him, and he said that Dr. Pepin would arrive at the castle later. At the mention of his name, Maclard heard annoyance in the witch's voice. He assumed dependence on him. Vienna denied her intimate relations with the doctor. Maclard told of what he had seen between them on the cliff. The witch was suspected of seducing Pepin. The Inquisitor asked if Pepin had tasted her blood. Vienna denied it, because the doctor had not lost his mind. But Maclard did not believe her. The Inquisitor suggested checking. He unexpectedly and passionately began to kiss the witch on the lips. The witch resisted as best she could. She was able to free herself from Macard's hands, and then she fell to the floor. The young witch covered her lips with her hand. She tried to understand what exactly had happened. It was a passionate kiss. Mr. Inquisitor even bit her lip a little. The girl tried to understand why a kiss that meant nothing, intended only to determine the truthfulness of her words, was so sensual. Macklart let the stunned girl go, and passing her he said that he would call a soldier. Vienna tried to stop him. After all, the Inquisitor had just tasted her blood and could have turned into a demon at any moment. But he ordered her to return to the carriage. Soon the crew set off. The captive sat in the cage on the floor. She was glad that everything was fine with Macklart and that he had not turned into a demon. But the gentleman never came to her since then. All he did was hunt witches without rest. The girl assumed that the whole thing was in divine power. But then she couldn't understand why such a man decided to kiss her, and she came to the conclusion that perhaps he just liked her. But then the cart shook and stopped. The great witch hit her head painfully and screamed involuntarily. The knight opened the door and ordered the witch to come out. When the girl was already close, the man in armor kicked her hard with his foot and rudely shouted at her to stand there. Vienna tripped over a stone and fell. She got up with difficulty and rubbed the bruised area. Looking around, the girl saw that the road was blocked, and so it was decided to stop the cart. She thought that maybe it was even for the best. After all, instead of driving all the time locked up, it was better to go out and walk. Here the knight extended his hand to the captive and pushed her hard in the back. The girl fell to the ground again. The overseer took her by the hand and put shackles on her. He ordered her in a rude tone to get up and walk as expected. The man was unhappy that he would have to drag her, the witch behind him. And here he would have to go on foot, and this irritated him even more. There was an assumption that this was her trick. Vienna knew it was a familiar way of addressing her, but it seemed so long ago that she had felt something like this. Mecklart's care had erased the memory. The girl caught herself on the word care. Yes, that's exactly how one could describe the Inquisitor's behavior towards the captive. She was brought out of her reverie by a kick from the knight. He shouted at the witch to move her legs. The overseer walked forward with long strides. The great witch barely kept up with him, chained to a long chain. Her bare feet stepped on dry earth and stones. This brought the captive torment because every step was given to her through pain. At some point, the girl stepped on a sharp stone and fell. The knight didn't even look in her direction, and with irritation on his face, he waited for her to get up herself. And he pulled the chain with force and in a rude tone ordered her to get up faster. The overseer continued to pull. The witch screamed. Another knight led 2 dogs from behind. The animals behaved aggressively. One animal got too close and bit the great witch's leg until it bled. The knight shouted at the dog, assuring his pet that the one she had bitten was vile. Vienna glanced at the dog's face from under the sly. The dog's eyes were red and his face was devoted. She thought that blood might have come out during the night. The witch was afraid that the others might suspect something, and she regretted that Macklart was not there. The girl caught herself involuntarily thinking about the Inquisitor again. The leader of the detachment commanded everyone to stop. He announced that they would spend the night here today. Vienna stepped into the water and gasped involuntarily. As she went deeper, she lifted the hem of her dress. A trickle of witch's scarlet blood flowed from the wound into the water. The wound hurt. The girl's whole body ached from fatigue. And tomorrow she would have to walk the whole day again in this condition. But she was glad that at least they let her wash up. She suddenly wanted to know what Macklart was doing now, what he was thinking about. But then she mentally ordered herself to stop thinking about him. After all, what was important now was how she herself would proceed. Stepping with her injured leg, the girl couldn't hold on to the slippery stone and fell into the water. Now all her clothes were wet and her body was rapidly cooling down. Vienna saw how scarlet blood flowed from the dog's bite wound and fell into the waters of the river. She thought that it was not that simple. Whether she would drown in the water, burn alive in the blue flames, or throw herself off the cliff, it did not matter. Vienna was ready to do anything just to get rid of this damned blood as soon as possible. Then a voice from behind asked what the girl was doing here. Looking back at the sound, the witch saw the Inquisitor. Her surprise knew no bounds. Vienna didn't answer right away. Macklart was asking why the witch was here alone and without a supervisor. The captive said that the escort had gone away for a while, and she only wanted to take a little bath. The Inquisitor thought that everyone around had simply gone crazy. He helped Vienna out and saw a wound on her leg. The Inquisitor asked about the cause of the injury. The witch replied that she had scratched herself while walking. Then Macklart picked up the girl and carried her into the tent. The witch burst into tears at the kindness shown to her. Vienna woke up in a tent. The Inquisitor was reading a book nearby. She noted that Maclart had not become a demon. The Inquisitor said that it was foolish to seriously believe in such a fairy tale. After all, a few drops of blood could not overcome the servant of God. These were the girl's fantasies. Maclart gave her food in a cloak. He told her to put it on and go outside after the meal. The witch was puzzled. There was a constant change in the master's attitude towards her. Outside, the knights were preparing for the journey. The captive looked at Maclart. She was afraid that she would not be able to follow the horses with her wounded leg. But the Inquisitor grabbed her and sat her on the horse, and he himself took his place in the saddle behind the witch. He declared that it was unacceptable to linger because of her. The Grand Inquisitor commanded the knights to advance. He whispered to Vienne to hold on tight, and they set off at a gallop. In the tent that had been pitched by evening, preparations were underway for tomorrow's witch hunt. Vienna was asleep. The Grand Inquisitor was told that witches could not hide on the plain. It seemed more like a trick, but he did not change his plans. Maclart was performing his nightly ablutions when he noticed his captive's bandaged wound. The Inquisitor recalled how this witch had pestered him from the first meeting. She was truly a burden. Suddenly, the witch stood up and offered to wash his back. After all, the knight's hands did not reach where they were needed. The Inquisitor was slightly taken aback, and the girl began to justify herself and apologize if her words sounded inappropriate. Maclart had no doubt that this great witch could not understand the situation she was in. Otherwise, she would not have to behave so defenselessly. And it turned out that the status of the great did not awaken in her either pride or a sense of responsibility. The Inquisitor clenched his fists and called the girl to him to rub his back. The man was impatient and hurried her. After all, she had offered to help, but now it seemed she had already changed her mind. Throwing off her cloak, Vienna hurried to the master, quietly saying that she would do it. Maclart stood motionless as the captive witch rubbed his back. The girl noticed that the skin was covered in scars. The gentleman asked how long she was going to rub. Vienna caught herself. She began to assure him that there was still just a little bit left. But then the girl noticed a blade of grass that was stuck to the gentleman's lower back, and she carefully touched it with her finger. Maclart turned sharply and was outraged that the captive witch allowed herself to do this. Vienna apologized timidly and assured that there was something stuck there, and she just wanted to remove it. The Inquisitor clenched his teeth, and then he pushed the girl onto her back and hovered over her. He asked menacingly what kind of tricks the witch had used. He assumed that the captive wanted to use him instead of Pepin this time. He demanded that the witch reveal her intentions. Vienna assured that she never used either the doctor or the Master Inquisitor. She simply genuinely wanted to help him. The girl was still interested in something, so she asked why Maclart showed mercy to her. She assumed that he was pursuing the same goals as the great priest. The Inquisitor called her speculation absurd. He said that it looked more like this, as if he was trying to get the girl to go to bed that way. Surprise was on Vienna's face. It was strange how he could say that. Vienna reminded him that he had not turned into a demon at all. The Inquisitor asked if that was what he meant by becoming a demon. It turned out that becoming a demon meant lusting after a great witch. The Inquisitor knew that the reason for all those irrational impulses was the blood he had drunk. And if just a couple of drops could do this to him, how vicious was the power of the great witch? Maclart decided that it was necessary to cleanse the world of all followers of the devil who were contrary to God's will, leaving not a single one alive. Vienna denied it. She said that the Inquisitor had not turned into a demon. After all, he had not lost his mind. Those who turned and drank the blood of the great witch were completely different. The demons were completely out of their minds. That's why the Inquisitor wouldn't be so confused. Maclart thought he had done something stupid, but he had to understand that having tried it just once, he would want a second time. Here the man pushed Vienna to the floor and kissed her lips. After all, she was confused by his pressure and did not know what to do. His hand slid down the witch's thigh. The girl asked what it all meant. The gentleman replied that he had indeed been bewitched by her. Maclart couldn't believe that the attraction was so strong, just because he drank her blood. And if this was God's test, then he agreed that he would never cope with it. He didn't care. Vienna saw a memory where men lost their minds after drinking her mother's blood. They only needed the body of the great witch. One of the demons wanted to pounce on her. The girl was scared. She sat at the entrance of the cave, covering her ears with her hands and pressing her back against the stone. One of the madmen desired the little girl. The red-haired witch insisted that she was not yet capable of giving birth. The other said that he did not care because the brain was lost. The girl opened her eyes and saw McClart's face above her. The gentleman was telling her to relax and breathe. Their fingers were intertwined and closed. McClart kissed her passionately. As he reached out, the witch tried to stop him with words. The girl did not understand how she could charm the Grand Inquisitor. Why she was his chosen one. The righteous man's body was engulfed in flames. He couldn't stop, even if he burned to ashes. He couldn't go back to the times when he didn't know her. Vienna woke up. She didn't remember when she had fallen asleep. McClart, in his pants and bare-chested, was looking at the smoldering coals in the fireplace. The witch was worried that what happened between them could harm his debt. The Lord said that everything would remain as before. God's flames were to envelop Tempeh. As planned. This was the answer the witch wanted to hear. The Inquisitor kissed her again, but something was pressing in the girl's chest. The next morning, Vienna discovered that her dress was torn. She realized that the master had done this while undressing her. Just then, McClart came in. He gave the captive her cloak again. The master did not want the witch to get caught in the rain and fall ill. Vienna asked if she could accompany the knights on their hunt today. The Inquisitor did not understand such a request. McClart thought it was because of the soldiers, but it was something else. The girl asked if the Inquisitors would cleanse the world of all the great witches today. McClart replied that he would certainly do so, and he headed for the exit. The witch stopped him. She asked to be shackled again. The master refused, because her ankles had not yet healed. The Inquisitor passionately kissed the girl on the lips again, licking the blood off them. He told her to wait for him here. Today, Taike was supposed to drown in flames, and the line of great witches was finally to end. The knights were hunting witches. One of the witches said that the child was to blame for everything. She could kill the child. Then her power would return to her. McClart ordered the mother to be killed and the baby to be left. The dog rushed at the witch. Vienna got a response. It was the dog that had bitten her last time. She was seeing real-time events. The dog smelled only one great witch. It was the girl's mother. McClart thought the child would be the next great witch, but he was wrong. Although for some reason he decided to keep the child alive. The Inquisitor wanted to present the child to the great priest. It is unknown what will happen when it is revealed that this is not a great witch. Vienna asked the knights for permission to wash her leg in the river, citing the fact that with such a wound on her leg she would not be able to escape anyway. The girl believed that the Grand Inquisitor would fulfill her wish. She hoped that the master would be able to understand the severity of the fate of the great witch. But now it was clear. Like all men, McClart simply wanted her blood. The witch was sure that her master had broken his promise. One of the knights was comforting a crying baby. The Inquisitor considered how easily his mother had talked about killing her own child. But it gave him useful information. If the new great witch was killed, the power would return to the old one. Only one could wield this power. Based on this, Vienna lost her value, and the high priest could stop being interested in her. McClart was informed that most of the witches had been killed, but it seemed that some were hiding nearby. The dog was acting strangely. The Inquisitor took him by the collar and looked closely. His eyes were red. The knight hurried to his horse and said that he would return first. He passed the guards who had released the witch. As expected, she was not in the tent. After listening to his subordinates, McClart went to look for the fugitive. He did not understand why the girl was putting on that show with the shackles. The bloody tracks were still fresh. Judging by the wounds, Vienna could not have gone far. The Inquisitor was not going to let her go any longer. And then he looked up and came across the witch. The Inquisitor was angry. The girl told him about the offer of the great priest. The master told the witch what he had learned from her mother. Vienna did not want to be saved only because of McClart's desire to possess her. The girl stepped closer to the cliff. She lifted one leg off the ground. The gentleman asked her not to do this. The witch only said that she always wanted to die in the water. She threw herself down. The Inquisitor shouted after her. Soon the waters came together over her body. Only the crows remained circling above the waves. McClart asked the knights if they had found anything. The Inquisitor's subordinates had seen nothing, even though they had searched the entire shore. Having explored every corner, they found black charred bodies and a cloak. The Inquisitor remembered how he had given it to the great witch to dress. He remembered her face all in tears. He pressed the wet clothes to himself and mourned the loss. After what happened, the Grand Inquisitor came to appear before the priest. He told McClart that his faith in God was stronger than anyone else's. The priest could not understand at all how the Great Inquisitor had managed to miss the Great Witch by mistake. And since no body had been found, there was a high probability that the fugitive was still alive. He was giving Maclart time to catch her and present her to God. The Inquisitor said that he couldn't do that. After all, if the witch fell into his hands, he might not give her to anyone else. The priest called the servant a stupid boy, and reminded him of his previous phrase about their interest in the same thing and that blood could not be deceived. Maclart stated that he acted in the same way as his father. The interlocutor was dumbfounded by what he heard. He soon approached the Inquisitor. He said that from now on he was relieving him of all authority. It seemed that he needed time. The priest took Maclart firmly by the shoulder. He expressed the hope that during the time of repentance he would fill his heart with reverence and strengthen his faith. So after the disappearance of the Great Witch, rumors began to spread throughout Chiron that the most powerful divine mace, Maclart Hemlock, had been enchanted by the Great Witch, and after that he took responsibility, leaving his post, and began repentance to strengthen his faith in God. The Inquisitors who replaced him continued the witch hunt, but none were able to achieve the same results as Maclart himself. And at the same time, the monster men, who everyone thought had been completely exterminated, began to appear on the outskirts of Temfe. They moved in groups. They treacherously attacked Chiron's strongholds, and Temfe began to turn into a battlefield again, drowning in flames. A year later, a young man stood with his back against the wall at a lonely house in the forest. He was obviously waiting for someone here. Suddenly alerted by a barely perceptible rustle, the brown-haired man grabbed his weapon, immediately pulling it out of its sheath. Soon a girl in long clothes with a deep hood came out from behind the fir trees. The young man was glad to recognize her, and he complained that he had been wary in vain. The brunette took off her hood, revealing her red eyes. The guy called her Anne. Noticing that she had returned later today, he asked what had happened. He said that he almost grew old while he waited for her. But the girl passed him silently, hurrying to go into the house. Anne had already approached the table, and the guy was still at the threshold. He was offended that she hadn't even said hello to the man, that he had waited for her the whole day. The girl answered dryly that she hadn't asked him to wait, and she began to undress. She told the guy to get lost if he was already completely healthy. The youth suddenly groaned and assured that he had not yet fully recovered. He asked if Anne knew how terrible the internal injuries could be. The girl noted that he was chatting like a healthy person, and she unwound the bandages on her wrist. There was a mark from her teeth. The guy said that he was upset. After all, it was not at all necessary to behave so coldly. Therefore, he asked to show a little more gratitude in their relationship. The girl looked down sadly. She assured that she had already repaid for saving her life. The brown-haired man was not at all against it. He assured that they could simply become friends on the basis that they owed each other their lives. Turning his back, he said that it was immediately obvious who the black ghost from the rumors was. After all, she had no equal in causticity. He asked her what she was going to do. He assured her that it would not be easy to survive alone as she was doing now. After all, that blood-crazed fanatic had returned. The young man said that the situation was getting worse for the monster people or witches. After all, now they rushed to search for them with burning eyes. Zentian emphasized that being in the same boat, it was worthwhile for them to join forces. Anne grabbed the young man by the collar and began shaking him furiously. She asked him if it was true that the Inquisitor had returned. He confirmed it. The Great Witch mentally cursed the scoundrel Maclart Hemlock. Vienne's face showed an emotion the boy couldn't explain. He reminded her that the Inquisitor was their enemy. Anne never forgot for a second that day when she fell from the cliff. The witch thought that Maclart was simply upset, since the captive had slipped from his hands. As she fell into the sea, Vienna believed in nothing. She woke up in the arms of a young man. He said that the girl had been carried by the current. He had dark hair and black eyes, which indicated that the guy belonged to the monster people. The witch remembered seeing this young man among the monsters. The Grand Inquisitor was supposed to kill them all. The girl told him that her mother had died at the hands of Maclart. She asked for help. The young man carried the witch on his back. Zeniart offered her to go with him and his comrades today. The rescued one refused. All this time, the witch was obtaining information about the location of the Inquisitors, receiving injuries as a result. Now she intended to leave this place. She advised the young man to do the same. Maclart looked at the ravens burning with blue fire. The black birds had started circling around Temfe a year ago. There were infidels where they were flying. The Inquisitor sensed who it could be. He ordered to move out at dawn. Maclart walked into the room. He remembered the witch sitting on the bed in this tent. The heretic inquisitor had a terrible year. The enraged priest forced Maclart to shed blood every day as proof of his faith. But the worst torment was not brought by torture, but by the vile smell of one's own blood. Unlike that woman's blood, after a year of repentance, the high priest showed mercy and sent the inquisitor in the name of God to cleanse the world of filth once again. It wasn't even a year before Maclart forgot how stupid he had been back then. He said he would never let the witch go again. The witch did not want to be caught this time. She did not plan to be deceived anymore. She had her own goal. The heroine intended to follow it. Zeniart asked if she was leaving right now since her hand was still bleeding. The guy wondered what the girl had seen in her dream. She replied that it was Maclart Hemlock. As she left, Vienna warned them of the approaching Grand Inquisitor. She said that at this rate they would be discovered within a couple of days. The witch thanked him for everything and was about to leave. But Zeniart grabbed her hand. The young man tried to persuade the girl to stay. She insisted that now everyone was on their own. But the guy said that because of her leg she would be quickly seized. Then the inquisitors will go out to the monster people. The wounded woman agreed to stay until they crossed the valley. Then Zeniart crouched down so that the girl could climb on his back. They were walking through the evening forest. Vienna asked them to stop. The witch extended her hand to a squirrel sitting on a tree. It licked the blood from her finger. Zeniart stated that when meeting his sworn enemy, he would be the first to rush into battle. The boy insisted that his duty was revenge. The witch asked what his tribesmen would do if he died. After all, Maclart was much stronger. Zen said that in the past, 5 monsters could kill an entire platoon of Karen's army. They would attack at lightning speed in the middle of the night. The Great Witch assured him that they had a common enemy. Her desire for revenge was something the boy had never even dreamed of. The monster man suggested they rest. He went off to hunt. Vienna sat under a tree. The witch gave herself up to thought. She wondered if Kieran's cleansing of the entire continent from filth would be a disaster. Perhaps everything that was happening was precisely the ending that the Great Witch was supposed to predict. Her death meant preventing the end of the world. She didn't want to prevent the end of the world. Her wish was for the continent to burn in flames. Zeniart came running out of breath. He had received a message from his fellow tribesmen. They were attacked by the Knights of Chiron. There was already an Inquisitor's camp in the vicinity of Irene's crossroads. Maclart had almost found it. Zeniart urgently got ready to go to the camp. He wanted to delay the Inquisitors as long as possible. The witch had a bad feeling. She did not want to let the young man go. But he said that a year ago he was the only one who survived in the pit of corpses. After that, he had to avenge his fellow tribesmen. And now he had a chance. Vienna thought that the guy should have taken revenge on her too. After all, she herself had given away the location of the camp. But she didn't say it out loud. Instead, she simply wished him luck. Zeniart suggested waiting for him in the Gurlum forest. He wanted to tell her something if he returned alive. After that, he kissed her on the forehead. He smiled tenderly, promised to definitely come back, and ran away, leaving the girl alone. Meanwhile, the knights were already in their home with Zeniart. They were surprised at how close the witch was hiding. The Grand Inquisitor was informed that, judging by the tracks, Vienna had not lived here alone. Maclart ordered the remaining living monster man to be brought in. He asked if it was true that one of them had lived with a black ghost. The poor guy confirmed it. At this moment, the knights brought news of the fugitive's tracks discovered in the vicinity. Maclart no longer needed the bait, and the monster man immediately burned in blue fire. The warriors were returning to camp. The Grand Inquisitor was going to find the witch before the smell of blood dissipated. Vienna walked for 2 days without sleeping a wink. Somehow she managed to reach Gurlum. The forest was too quiet. She hadn't met any wild animals along the way. This was alarming. The girl didn't know if she should wait for Zeniart, but then she heard the monster man calling her. Luckily, he survived. At that moment, there was a response. The witch saw through the eyes of the squirrel that the knights had put in the cage. She felt like she was locked in, and it was as if Maclart was looking at her in a cage. Vienna realized that the Inquisitor knew everything. About the squirrel, her situation, and Zentian. Instead of answering the call, she decided to leave here as quickly as possible. The witch noticed that she was leaving bloody marks behind her. She decided to fix it by cutting her hand with a knife. It occurred to Zentian that the girl had not waited for him and had left first. The guy returned to his people. The monster people were waiting for him to save one of their fellow tribesmen. The guy refused. He went to look for his wounded companion. Not having walked long, he noticed an inquisitorial ambush. He realized that he had filled his head with searching for Vienna and had made a mistake. The guy boldly suggested that they attack first. The knights came to him. Maclart noticed a raven with red eyes. The fugitive decided to fill everything here with the smell of blood. The Inquisitor thought that the witch had definitely fallen into the squirrel trap left for her. Vienna had to be somewhere nearby. She had hardly managed to get out of the forest. Maclart realized that thanks to the recent response, the witch knew that the pursuit was somewhere nearby. If they were to reunite with their companion, their relationship must have been quite close. One of the knights came running with news that the squad was attacked by a monster man. The commander decided to move there immediately. Zentian had just dealt with everyone when he was overtaken by the Grand Inquisitor and his squad. The monster man called Maclart a rat for spying on him. To this, the envoy of the Great Priest replied that it would have been better if he had hidden. That way, he could have lasted longer. The boy replied that he did not have the habit of tucking his tail between his legs. The Inquisitor asked if he lived with the Black Ghost. The young man was puzzled as to how Maclart knew about this nickname. The knight said that his fellow tribesmen had given it all away. He demanded to know where the monster man and the witch had agreed to meet. The guy replied that it was none of his business. He stated that the fugitive did not want to see the Inquisitor, since he was the sworn enemy of her family. Maclart asked again if she had said exactly that. He assured her that the young man did not know the witch at all. Maclart asked if she had also mentioned how she had given away her own mother's location. The monster man didn't believe it and pushed the Inquisitor. He realized that the boy wasn't as close to the runaway as he thought. The leader of the knights decided to leave the young man alive, until the traitor was caught. He ordered the forest to be set on fire and went in search of the witch. Vienna couldn't walk any longer. Smelling the scent of acacia, she decided to rest here and then set off again. She needed to get to the shelter on the shore. Thoughts of suicide came into the witch's head. She really didn't want to fall into the hands of the Inquisitors. The fugitive was afraid of being subjected to terrible torture. She thought that Maclart had already killed the Great Witch's useless child. But if the child was alive, then after her death, it should have inherited the power. She woke up without noticing how she had passed out. It looked like sunset was approaching. No, it was the sky that was glowing red from the forest fire. The witch thought it necessary to leave quickly. Just then, Zentian arrived. The guy immediately asked if everything was okay with her. From the paleness of the girl's face, it was clear that she had lost blood again. Vienna asked the young man if he had met the Inquisitor. He replied that he had spoken with the chief of the knights, and had managed to escape from him. Although he couldn't kill the main one, he dealt with the other soldiers. He assured them that they wouldn't chase him. The young man wanted to say something else, but changed his mind. I decided to talk about it after leaving the forest. After all, the fire was growing rapidly. Meanwhile, Zentian was carrying the red-eyed girl on his back. Having gone down to the river, he suggested crossing it. The monster man stated that he had previously hidden the boat somewhere in the bushes near the shore. It had to be found. Before that, I decided to ask Vienna if she really was the traitor. The witch clutched the knife in her hands. Seeing how long the girl remained silent, Zentian said that it was no longer necessary to answer. He asked her to tell him whether it was she who had led the knights to their camp a year ago. The witch understood why Maclart let the boy go, and asked if that was what he wanted to say. The monster man replied that he wanted to say something else. He asked for an answer. The girl said that the conversation would be long, and suggested to talk after crossing the river. Zentian wanted an answer now, grabbing her hand. Then the witch asked him if he trusted her. The young man agreed to swim across the river and talk in a safe place. The monster man followed the boat. His companion said that she went to look for animals. She mentally asked the guy for forgiveness. Vienna walked toward the ravine where witches used to hide during hunts or natural disasters. She moved the familiar hiding place. It was quite narrow, but the girl managed to squeeze in. Soon she heard Zentian screaming to run. Right next to the gorge Maclart passed. The girl was overcome with horror. She couldn't make a sound. She squeezed into the depths of the cave. She shouldn't have been visible from the outside, but then she accidentally scratched her hand. The Inquisitor said that he had particularly strange sensations in this place. The knights reported to the Lord about the discovery of the monster man. He ordered to seize the guy. The witch was afraid for her friend. Maclart did notice the crack, and looking in, he saw the witch cowering in the corner. He quietly said her name. The Inquisitor thought for a long time about what he would say the next time he met with Vienna. After all, they had spent too little time together to talk about longing. He asked if she regretted it. After all, if she had died then, she would have been able to escape from him. Behind her, Zentian was struggling in the knight's arms and calling for the witch to run. But the girl realized that it was too late. Maclart said that she had already betrayed the witches, and now the monster people too. It turned out that the girl had no one to rely on this earth. Fianna didn't understand the look he was giving her. She replied that it didn't matter to her. The Inquisitor considered himself the only one who could make all her wishes come true. And the witch knew it, and also who could destroy them. Fianna asked him not to worry, and assured him that she didn't trust anyone anyway. Clutching the hem of her cloak, the girl resolutely turned her back to the Inquisitor and quickened her pace, going deeper into the cave. Maclart shouted after her and called her by name. The Great Witch walked in the darkness on the rocky surface. In order not to stumble upon obstacles, she felt the ledges. She needed to run as fast as possible, but her injured leg didn't let her move faster. And at some point the girl stumbled and fell flat. She remembered how the Inquisitor looked through the crack and found her, the fugitive. But then she suddenly heard voices, and raising her head she saw the light from the fire in the depths of the cave. One of the women recognized Vienna right there. The others picked up on it, joining in the emotion. They said they believed in her return. They thought they were now saved. They fanatically extended their hands to the Great Witch. The girl tried to avoid contact. It was surprising that even knowing what she had done, the witches recognized her. The woman with the burn on her head replied that it was not too late to do her duty. Then Vienna would have atoned for her guilt. She said that she forgave her. After all, it was the fate of the Great Witch. Having embraced the women, they assured that they needed her. The women were quietly talking to each other, that the Great Witch was being pursued by the Inquisitor, and that's why they had to hurry. Having chosen a road with forks, they decided to leave the pursuit that way. Vienna thought that the witches were ready to just take her away with them. But then again, even if they found out about everything, it wouldn't change anything. With her leg injury, she wouldn't have been able to run far. Suddenly, she remembered Maclart's words, that she had already betrayed the witches and the monster people, and there was no one to rely on. Fianna thought that if someone said that now, maybe she would grab his hand, because the voice of the Inquisitor then sounded as if there was a longing for him and his selfless kindness. The girl found it funny that she missed a man who was capable of mercilessly sacrificing her to God. After all, Maclart was called the Sword of the Great Priest and an Inquisitor with unwavering faith in God. Fianna knew that he would never abandon God to fulfill her cherished desire. A tear of sadness rolled down her cheek, and near the crack of the cave, Maclart threateningly asked the monster man where the Great Witch had gone. Zentian smiled and said that he would not say that. The guy was ready to die, but not to give Anne away. The Inquisitor gritted his teeth in frustration. Throwing the young man to the ground, he said that he simply didn't know. He no longer saw any use for the captive monster man, and he decided to follow the Great Witch himself. Entering the cave, Meklar hurried to follow the witch before her sweet scent dissipated. If there wasn't a stone wall between them, Maclart would have hugged this girl right there, wouldn't have let her run away, and he would forget about everything in the world except her. Looking at Vienna, he realized that the attraction was undeniable. The high priest unexpectedly allowed him not to limit himself regarding the witch. In exchange, the Inquisitor had to force her to give birth to an heir who would be offered to God. The priest wanted to save this world. And now, walking through the cave, Maclart realized that he could not bear to see the death of the Great Witch again. Two women were pulling a cart with things and 3 barrels. Vienna was sitting there. The Scar Witch told the Great Witch about her sister's birth, and that the baby had been taken by Chiron's people. The child, who had no strength, did not die immediately after birth, contrary to custom. It was the dog that bit Vianne. He became the beast that would bring destruction. The Great Witch's power existed only to find the animal. Now it was her duty to fulfill her mother's prophecy to the end. To save the world, the chosen one had to die. The witches pushed Vienna to fulfill her duty. The girl always wanted to drown, but that wasn't enough. A sword was needed to fulfill the prophecy. Vienna stood silently. The witches asked if she was going to renounce her duty. The Great One asked what would happen if her death did not change anything. In response, she heard that then another would inherit her power, and nothing would change. The witches essentially didn't care whether Vienna died or not. Their end would have come anyway. But the witches knew about her conspiracy with Chiron, and they intended to kill the traitor to fulfill the prophecy. They held her hand. Scar had swung her sword, and then Vienna saw blue fire. Then Maclart appeared. The girl was saved. The witch wanted to be killed. The Inquisitor said he would rather destroy everything for her. Maclart picked her up in his arms and promised to always be there for her. The man was ready to burn the world if that was what it took for his beloved. Viana was awakened by the crackling of the fireplace. She rose from her soft bed in the magnificently furnished chambers. There was a candelabra with lit candles next to the bed. This place was familiar to her. Rave Castle. Still weak, she walked a little and saw Mackeltart in his house clothes. The knight immediately picked the girl up in his arms. The witch gasped and said that she could already walk, but the Inquisitor laid her on the bed. The patient tried to insist that she was already fine, but the Inquisitor did not pay attention to these words. He said that the girl could only eat soup without seasonings. The patient also found a personal doctor who would treat the wounds twice a day in his presence. Vienna wondered if they would give her to the high priest after her recovery, or if they would take her blood for experiments. The Inquisitor climbed onto the bed to be above her. The master reminded her that he would kill everyone except the Great Witch, and her place would be next to him. Macklart kissed his beloved passionately, but when he touched her forehead, he realized that she had a fever. The gentleman told her to sleep some more and hurried away. Fianna tested the blood on her lips with her finger, wondering if the scent remained. At the council, the knights reported to the Grand Inquisitor that the monsters had disappeared. It was equally difficult to find even one witch. Macklart considered leaving at least one alive. He couldn't help himself and burned the witches who wanted to kill his beloved. Such emotional haste was in vain. He turned the unknown cup in his hands and could not understand what it was. There was also some kind of sword. Now no one could tell what purpose these things had. After thinking, the commander ordered the soldiers to be brought into order. He asked if there were any church servants left in the castle. He ordered that Father Brown be sent away. Finally, the Inquisitor told the soldiers to leave if they had nothing more to report. The knights obeyed. Macklart hurried to the witch. It was scary to leave her alone even for a second. The patient may also have experienced strange obsessive thoughts along with a desire to escape. In the corridor in front of his beloved's room, he met the attending physician Moiria. He asked about the patient's condition. The doctor did not understand how the patient was still alive with such wounds. The doctor was particularly concerned about the right ankle. She suggested that it might have to be chopped off. For now, she advised simply not to let the girl move. Macklart calmly said that the ankle was nothing. The main thing is to cure the patient. The doctor was perplexed as to how one could talk about curing a patient in such a state, but Macklart had already entered the room. Vienna sat on the floor and ate soup. The Inquisitor had an interesting thought in his head. If the ankle has to be cut off, the witch will no longer be able to escape. Macklart looked with displeasure at his beloved sitting on the floor. Food was served to her in bed. The girl said she didn't want to spill the soup on the bed. The Inquisitor asked if he should tie the witch up so she wouldn't get up. He said to eat in bed next time. The witch submitted. Macklart was also dissatisfied with the fullness of the bowl. The medicines didn't work on an empty stomach. He insisted that the witch eat well. He asked why Vienna didn't at least sit on the sofa. The girl replied that the sofa belonged to the master. The Inquisitor wondered if his beloved did not want to sit on the sofa where he sat. The patient replied that the Inquisitor was going to kill her. Macklart asked where the girl got such thoughts. She said that this is the only way the power of the Great Witch can be passed on. The Inquisitor asked what she was talking about. The witch told him that she had heard about a child being left alive, and she asked why the child had not been killed. Macklart never actually heard of the child's fate after that day. He himself thought the baby had been killed. If not, he didn't know why either. The knight spoke with inspiration that if someone had to die, it would be the child. But not her. A tear ran down the witch's cheek. The Inquisitor kissed her on the lips. The girl freed herself from the kiss. She wondered why there was such concern about her food. There had been a shortage of provisions before. Macklart personally ordered that she be fed so that she would not die. The girl also recalled that she heard the Inquisitor tell her not to be an eyesore with her unsightly appearance. Macklart felt awkward. He noticed that his castle would not be poorer from one extra mouth, and again he pulled his beloved to him for a kiss. The gentleman told her to get well soon, as it was difficult for him to control himself. Moiria removed the patient's bandage. Fortunately, the swelling on her leg had noticeably subsided. The doctor decided to leave the splint on, but she allowed her to walk, leaning on a crutch. The patient thanked her and asked if the healer knew that she was treating a great witch. The healer replied that there was no one in the castle who was unaware of her identity. She added that Macklart had strictly forbidden anyone to touch the girl. Therefore, the patient could not stand on ceremony with anyone, except, of course, the owner of the castle. Macklart had just entered the room. The doctor announced that they were finished. The Inquisitor was reproaching him for his slow recovery. The doctor advised taking the patient out into the sunlight for short walks. This would speed up recovery. Maclard asked the woman if she would take responsibility for complications related to the walks. She said there was no reason. But she explained that even a healthy person would become ill if they lived locked up. The healer left. Vienna said she might not go out. If it made the master suspect her of seducing soldiers. Something like that had happened before. He asked again if he had said that. Vienna confirmed it. The Inquisitor felt great shame for the amount of stupidity he had said. Vienna assumed that all the treatment was for the sake of a warm bed. But the Inquisitor assured that in that case he would have taken possession of her on the first day. The girl did not understand why the gentleman cared about her. She remembered that last time he spared her for informing. But what Maclart wanted now was a mystery to the witch. He answered that there was nothing special about it. He just couldn't kill her. Vienna asked if this also concerned purification in the name of the Lord God. The knight's answer was yes. Maclart asked her to stop guessing about the reason for his kindness. It was enough to simply pretend that she knew nothing and try to get used to it. The Inquisitor hoped that later Vienna would no longer want to ask about the reason herself. Instead of saying goodbye, he said he would come by after dinner. Over his shoulder, Maclart told the witch to get ready for a light walk. The girl was left alone. She did not know what to do if she was afraid to get used to the gentleman's kindness. After a while, Vienna took cautious steps away from the porch towards the garden. The Inquisitor and the physician watched her from the side. Maclart asked the medic if the girl was sure she could walk by herself. Moiria asked if she had really been asked to go for a walk with them. The knight hurried to catch up with Vienna. He asked her to tell him if it became difficult for the girl to walk, and he offered to go sit down if she was tired. Vienna said that they had just walked away from the door, but after thinking about it, she agreed to sit down for a minute. They sat in silence for a while, but then a squirrel ran up to Vienne. The girl leaned over to the little animal, but Maclart immediately grabbed the witch's hand. With anger in his eyes, he asked what she was going to do. He assumed she was going to feed the little animal her blood, but he couldn't understand why she needed a response. Vienna was making excuses. That it was just a habit. She assured me that the small animals needed less blood, and it was calmer for her to monitor the area this way. Maclart asked again if she was going to run away. The witch answered in the negative. He let go of the girl's hand and grabbed his head. The gentleman asked why, if she didn't even intend to run away and didn't seem to feel any pain or discomfort. She did it. Vienna assured that she had lived her whole life with the feeling of pain, and simply did not attach any importance to it. Maclart stated that during the entire time that the girl was given, not a single new wound would appear on her body. The witch turned away. She said that with such a leg she had no time to escape. The man sat down next to her. He started touching her leg, checking it and feeling it. He said that according to the doctor, if they had tightened it a little more, she would never have been able to step on it. But then Maclart himself would no longer worry that his beloved would run away. He confessed that he had thought about breaking her leg on purpose. Vienna was amazed, and asked why he didn't do it. The gentleman assured her that it was because he was the most courteous man in her life. Holding out his hand, Maclart invited the witch to walk a little, and soon their figures were moving away towards the garden. Shoes and clothes taken off in a hurry lay on the floor. Vienna rested her hands on the gentleman's bare torso. Maclart asked what was the matter. The girl reminded him of the doctor's advice not to overexert herself, but the splint had already been removed, and the knight thought that the girl would be able to withstand such a load. The doctor thought so too. The girl stated that it was unlikely that her doctor had this particular load in mind. Maclart asked if the witch had looked at him enough. He took her hand and wetly licked it. The witch tried to avoid his caresses as best she could, but the knight's strong hand attracted his partner. During the struggle, the girl found herself on top of her partner. Frightened, she began to ask him for forgiveness. She assured him that she had not pushed him intentionally. The witch cut her lip. A drop of blood fell on the gentleman's lips. He looked into her eyes in amazement. Suddenly, Maclart laughed. It was some kind of uncontrollable laughter, similar to madness. The girl was worried about him. The gentleman pulled her to himself. Having calmed down, he admitted that Vienna was right, that the load the doctor had spoken of was nothing compared to this. The girl did not understand what was being discussed. Maclart tucked her hair behind her ear and began to caress her neck and shoulders. He smiled happily at this. The first timid rays of the morning sun broke through the clouds, partially illuminating the estate of Maclart Hemlock. Light poured into the room from the window. Vienna sat on the bed. Her back was aching. The witch decided to go for a walk in the garden. Having put herself in order, the girl left the room and informed the guards of her desire to go out into the yard. Maclart had stopped locking the room since they started sharing a bed again. The Great Witch was even allowed to move freely in the presence of guards. Vienna walked around the picturesque garden. She didn't see any other animals there. The gentleman had been very generous to her, allowing her to walk without him. No one had ever treated her with such kindness. At these thoughts, the girl immediately remembered Zentian. She wondered if the guy was okay, or if the Grand Inquisitor had killed him. After the deception, the witch would hardly be able to look him in the eyes, but she wanted to make sure that the monster man was alive. Crows circled over the palace. Those birds again. The guard immediately said that Vienne had to return to the room. As they were about to leave, Dr. Pepin appeared from somewhere, smiling. The girl was frightened. She was not happy to see her old acquaintance. The man in black told the guards that he was the attending physician. Vienna assured them that Moiria had been assigned to her. The guard led the witch away. The doctor assured her that they would see each other again. Pepin went to the Inquisitor. He quipped that the Supreme One had recently become interested in raising his pet. The doctor was here on orders from the High Priest, who had been very worried about Maclart lately. The Inquisitor asked sharply if he had stolen the child of the Great Witch. The man in black replied that the child had been given into his hands for experiments. That was all. But after finding the Great Witch, Pepin saw no need for a child. Then the owner of the castle said that he would not touch the girl. I asked why the man in black had come then. He said that he had heard about the capture of the monster man. The Inquisitor had caught Zentian, and now he was holding him in custody. The boy couldn't understand why he was left alive. The healer said that it was necessary to find out about the witch's living conditions throughout the year, and her diet. The doctor said that the purpose of his visit was not his own whim. The health of the great priest had deteriorated, and he needed to check something. Maclart allowed him to meet with the monster man in the presence of guards. The doctor noted that questions about the priest's health must be kept secret. The Inquisitor asked about the time period. He heard the answer: 10 days. Nothing should have happened in that time. Vienna could have been locked in the room again. Maclart agreed to give his guest a room near the underground prison. Then the man in black began babbling something about tempting the Inquisitor. At the master's command, the guards led him out of the room. The doctor shouted about some blessing given by God. The high priest simply handed it over. God could take it away. Maclart wondered if his beloved was taken away from him. Would he be able to survive it? It was worth studying the conditions of God's blessing. Vienna was lounging in bed with her master. She said that she still could not believe the peace in her life. Maclart was sleeping. She stirred. The Inquisitor opened his eyes. The witch was worried that she had woken her master. The knight said that it was time to go and pray anyway. While dressing, he began to talk about Pepin. The gentleman informed his beloved about the need for a doctor to be in the castle. Just 10 days. He noticed that this could be unpleasant for the girl, and asked to speak if Vienne needed anything. The witch noted that she needed nothing. Then the Inquisitor advised her to think of what she needed, and he kissed her lock of hair goodbye. Maclart was furious with his subordinates. The latest reports had said that the monstermen were hiding. Now it turned out that they were in a major rebellion. The careless knights missed this. Pepin also requested an increase in the hours of the monster man's visits. The Grand Inquisitor ordered that the doctor forget about this if he did not want to remain in the underground prison forever. Maclart was reminded that no one would treat anyone with disrespect who had the symbol of the high priest. The chief remained silent. He asked if there was anything else. The monster man asked to meet the Great Witch. Otherwise, he refused to cooperate with the doctor. For the Inquisitor, this was unheard of. Gritting his teeth, he finally agreed, and told them to tell the doctor that this was the last time he was going to do something like this. The Inquisitor reassured himself that nothing would happen if they just saw each other. Maclart led his beloved to the monster man in prison. Supporting her by the arm, he asked her to step carefully. She never thought she would be able to see the guy in such circumstances. She just didn't understand why the gentleman allowed it. The doctor was glad to see them. He told the monster that the witch had come to him as he had asked. Exhausted, Zentian looked up at the girl. The Inquisitor asked if that was enough. Suddenly, the Great Witch spoke. She asked to speak alone with the monster man. She wanted to say goodbye to him. Maclart threatened the prisoner with immediate burning if anything happened, and left with the doctor. Zentian spoke. He noted that the girl looked healthy, but he was saddened by the fact that she was really in league with the Inquisitor. It was not a rumor. The boy said he knew what Maclart wanted from her. the birth of a child. Besides, the doctor hoped that his turn with the witch would come. The prisoner let Vian in on his plans. His comrades were to start a rebellion, after which the Inquisitor would leave the castle. They would have left with the witch at the right moment. McClart appeared as soon as these words were spoken. He immediately asked the prisoner what he had said. The boy replied that he had nothing to say to the traitor. The Inquisitor did not believe him. He looked at the young man very angrily. Pepin even had to remind him that it was forbidden to kill a prisoner. Vienna understood why the master prayed every single day. The mace of God had to sleep with the dirty witch. She thought it was all for a cause. McClart carried the girl out of prison in his arms. Even now his embrace somehow seemed gentle. Tears fell on McClart's face. Today in bed the witch cried, looking into the master's eyes. The Inquisitor asked why. Was it from happiness? She replied that everything was fine. The knight asked to speak if it hurts, or if the girl is not happy. Having kissed his beloved, McClart said that he would have to leave tomorrow. He told her about the rebellion of the monster people, but he promised to return soon. Vienna wrapped her arms around the master's powerful back and sadly asked him to be careful. At dawn, the knight set out in a small detachment led by McClart. Zentian came to the witch. He got out of prison, killing all the guards, and now they were going to leave. Moiria ran up to them. The doctor warned that the Grand Inquisitor could kill the witch for her escape. The girl asked to tell the master that the blood of the Great Witch would end on her, and that McClart should forget about the existence of her power. The healer tried to stop them, but the monster man and the witch came out. Fianna told her companion that she should have died earlier, when she still didn't know anything. McClart returned to the deserted castle. The healer relayed the witch's words to him. The Inquisitor immediately rushed into the prison. There he found Pepin's shackled corpse. The doctor had some kind of scroll in his hand. The text spoke about what a priest should do to preserve divine power. To do this, it was necessary to impregnate the Great Witch. A minute later, McClart rode out of the castle alone. Zentian carried the witch on his back. She said she could walk on her own. The monster man assured her that there was still a little more to go. Without finishing, he fell to the ground exhausted. The girl tried to bring him to his senses. Zentian's fellow tribesmen emerged from the bushes. The monsterman lifted the exhausted man by the arms. They looked at the Great Witch with fascination. Then she said that she needed help. Otherwise, they would all be caught. One of the monster people was a woman. She invited Vianna to climb onto her horse. The girls lit a fire nearby. The new acquaintance asked why the Inquisitor was so picky about her. The witch replied that Chiron needed her power. The monster woman corrected him that it was the priest who needed the power. The fugitive asked how this was known. She replied that the Supreme One had taken away their strength as well. The saint had been nourishing his youth and strength with the help of others. The priest was a very bad person. As a vessel, he sucked energy out of everyone, subjugating them. The monster woman showed how she coated her blades with poison. Vienna wasn't too interested. The witch wanted to sleep. A new acquaintance asked why the girl had not been given to the priest a year ago. She assumed that the Inquisitor had taken a fancy to Vienna. The witch said that it no longer mattered. In the morning, the girls reached the river. The companion said that it was a lovely place. Vienne thought that it would be just perfect for death. The witch thanked the monster woman for her help. She asked if the Great Witch would leave any will. She promised to fulfill it. The girl asked to convey to Zentian her gratitude for everything and her parting words. The monster woman felt sorry for her fellow tribesmen. After all, first love was always unhappy and unrequited. Seeing that the witch was standing on the shore in indecision, she offered to push her if necessary. Vienna picked up the hem of her luxurious lace dress and timidly stepped into the cold, almost icy water. Her legs were paralyzed by heaviness. But the witch could endure that. And if she had known that everything would be so simple, she would have turned to the monstermen from the very beginning. She thought sadly that she had wasted so much time on Mark Lay, only to end up with his affection and kindness. The girl from the shore called out to the Great Witch and asked if the bottom was too shallow. She suggested that she step forward so that everything would change radically. Vienna's feet felt cold and sticky. For a moment she wondered if the water was always this icy. The seaweed was entangling her body more and more. It seemed that because of that, the girl could no longer take a single step forward. The crows began to circle above her head. Vienna wondered if she was afraid of death. The monster woman thought about it. Then she shouted that she was coming to help, and she took a short dagger out of its sheath. Vienna, without turning around, asked her not to worry. Coming up from behind, she said that it wouldn't hurt, promising to handle it in one go. And she raised the weapon. which glittered with steel over the Great Witch. Vienna mentally scolded herself for believing in her illusory calm, and she agreed that someone would help her. She looked into the water at her reflection. The witch closed her eyes and prepared herself. Let it be so, because she herself could still change her mind about dying. But then a splash was heard from behind. This distracted the girl. Seeing the Inquisitor, the monster asked if he really liked the Great Witch so much. Maclart ignored her. He was calling for Vianne. The witch was surprised that the master had managed to get here so quickly. The Inquisitor remembered her wish to die in the water, and this shore was closest to the castle. Maclart asked her to stand still, and he went to her in the water. The monster woman declared that such disdain was beyond all bounds, and she rushed to attack him. Metal clanged. The girl was simultaneously calling her opponent all sorts of names during the fight. But the Inquisitor managed to throw her far away onto the shore with a powerful kick. Vienna saw how the master pierced the fidgety monster girl, killing her with one blow. Maclart reminded his beloved of his promise to do everything for her, and asked if that wasn't enough for her. The witch replied that the master was avoiding what she really wanted to destroy, and he said that he could not kill her. Maclart already had great divine power, and she had no idea why he tried to get the power of a great witch, and treated her like a servant of the devil. He said that he was trying to save not the great witch, but Vienna. But the girl did not believe that the master was not interested in her power at all. After all, the witch couldn't trust his words. Neither then nor now could she rid herself of doubts. After all, she wasn't used to causeless kindness. Maclart could not understand what he had to do to kindle the flame of desire to live in her. The witch answered, smiling, that there was no such way. Meanwhile, the monster woman found her last strength. She threw a short dagger rubbed with poison towards Vienna with all her might. A moment later, the weapon was sticking out of the great witch's belly, and blood was seeping down her dress. Maclart was very upset and annoyed. Vienna fell and began to drown. The Inquisitor immediately dove after her, and soon he caught his beloved in the water. Some time later, the girl was lying unconscious on the bed. Maclart was sitting next to her with his head down. The doctor assured her that she had done everything she could. Now all that was left was to give the wounded woman decoctions to drink, and watch. Soon the woman went out for the missing medicines. Maclart spoke to his beloved. He found it funny that after all he had lived through, he knew only one thing, that the girl wanted to die, and he wanted to do anything to stop her. He believed that when she woke up, her beloved would hate him as soon as she opened her eyes. The Inquisitor was ready to accept this too, and to endure it all his life. He asked Vienna only to survive. He gently touched his beloved's hand, kissed her fingers, assured that when she woke up the world would change beyond recognition. The priest saw Maclart in his helmet after the prayer, and he came closer. The Inquisitor immediately cut him with his sword. Seeing this, the other priest hiccuped nervously, and shouted in horror that Maclart had become an apostate. The Inquisitor stated that God had not yet taken away his power. Therefore he could not be an apostate. The minister called for help. The knights came running. Maclart burned them with blue fire without hesitation. He called it God's judgment. Corinne, the doctor's assistant, came back from the market. She said that Zentian wanted to eat something. Moiria didn't understand what the girl saw in the monster man. The guy shied away from work but instead wiped the corners of the kitchen. She considered him a liar. She also regretted taking a job at Raven's castle. After all, she had initially liked the level of income offered, but she didn't know that she would be locked up there for 6 months. After the Inquisitor arrived, the doctor planned to rewrite the terms of the contract with him. She wanted her salary to be raised. Entering Vienna's room, the woman saw that the witch was sitting upright on the bed. The healer was surprised that her patient had already woken up, and she inadvertently dropped the wooden box with the medicines and herbs she had prepared in advance. Zentinian came running right away. He asked if Anne recognized him. The doctor barked at the guy so that he would shut up and not be shocked by the screams of a person who was still weak from the wound. The monster man quipped that Moiria's voice was louder than his. The woman reminded him that she should be called Madam Doctor. Corey laughingly assured that they were both loud. The girl saw how the squabble continued at the bedside of the patient, and Vianna herself sat not paying attention to them.